The northern elves, such damage they made. The final battle, the price they paid. Once upon a time, the lands were united. Elves and humans lived side by side in harmony in the villages. Dragons roamed the skies and blessed us with their magic and protection. There was peace. Then, one dark winter night at the Senwatos castle, where the old king was making ready to sleep, an arrow flew through the air. It broke through the window of the castle tower and pierced the old king's heart. Evidence, Hank interrupted. Emea scolded at him, which immediately shut him right up. She then turned to Aide, who seemed unbothered by his comment. Please continue. The old king's son saw the arrow and assumed what every man has done henceforth. Aide continued and glanced around the campfire. That an elf made that shot, and that we are responsible for the war that followed. Where's the proof that ye didn't? Hank intervened again. I'm getting there, Aide patiently said. The men around the fire seemed captivated by his story, as if they could see the story transpire before their eyes. Emea felt it herself, too. The old king's son took the throne after his father and swore revenge on the elves. He saw the arrow as an invitation for war, and so he accepted it. What followed were years of cold-blooded war where thousands of innocent people died. Aide paused and looked at the ground. People and dragons. Dragons, Emea whispered. Those creatures had always fascinated her, and hearing a story about them from someone linked directly to them. It was like talking to a dragon's ancestor. Why should we care about those? Hank snarled. They burned our villages down, they killed our women. Dragons were smart, evolved creatures. Aide spoke up and met Hank's eyes. They were born of magic and had nothing to do with the war. Not until ye elves started riding their backs and coaxing them into doing ye bidding. Hank barked. This is ridiculous. Why are we sitting here when we should just kill? Hank, Emea snapped. We said we'd listen to him, so close your yap and let him speak, or so help me God, I'll tell your wife you killed an unarmed man. Hank's mouth formed an O, but after a moment of just staring mortified at her, he finally shut up for good. Emea nodded content. Please, Aide, continue. Aide had been patiently waiting while calmly smiling at her. She was beginning to think that he purposely let her handle things just to see the fire he claimed she had. Now that she had burned down again, he nodded and turned to the men. As I was saying, both dragons and people were getting slaughtered, and the elves started to grow outnumbered. It became so bad in the end that elves were driven from the villages or killed if they tried to get in. That's when we decided to flee to the furthest corners of the world. Aide glanced into the fire, his crystal orbs flickering in the light of the flame. Our cousins chose to travel to the southern islands, whereas we traveled to the north with the dragons. We figured they would be safer up in the mountains, where it was too cold for humans to travel. And for years, it worked. One night, though, a slaughter party commenced. Aide looked up to the silent crowd, and Emea felt a shudder run through her body. She knew what day he was talking about. It was the night known as the final battle. The king sent his men deep into the mountains on a mission to kill the last of the standing elves. He sent men to every corner of his kingdom and killed every man, woman, or child that resembled an elf, better known as the Great Purge. Our cousins, the ones who begged for their lives, were granted mercy if they agreed to complete surrender and imprisonment. The ones who didn't were beheaded and thrown into the seas. Umea had a bad taste in her mouth. From the day she was born, she had been taught to hate and fear the elves, but listening to Aide's story made her realize they had suffered more than humans had. At least she got to show her face in public without being met with disgust and hatred. His people had lived in exile up in the cold mountains for decades. Imagine the weather conditions. When the king's men finally made it to the Aide Mountains, after many years of searching, they climbed their way up and murdered every elf they met. Village after villages was burned down, and innocent children, women and men were murdered. The punishment fits the crime, Hank grunted. Umea shot him another look that made him grumble in silence. When they finally made it to the top, they found what we had been hiding all those years. Aide continued, and Umea noticed a change in his voice. They stumbled upon a cave in which we had stored all the dragon eggs for safekeeping. Every beautiful, magical egg of the last dragons left. He paused to swallow, this part clearly being difficult for him. Umea saw his otherwise strong eyes flicker with the same haunted look she had noticed at their first meeting. As if the pain of his ancestors still coursed through his veins. When the men saw all the eggs, they thought we were creating an army, he finally continued. So they broke the eggs and thus killed the last generation of dragons. That night, the final battle stood. The northern elves, such damage they made, the final battle, the price they paid. The old nursery rhyme sung through Umea's head, but felt like a cut to her stomach. The king's men found the last village with the last of the dragons remaining and killed them all. When they returned to Senwatos, the men were called heroes. Aide said the last word through gritted teeth, and Umea noticed his hands clenched in fury. She had no doubt that retelling the story of their doom affected him. I still don't see the proof anywhere, Hank spoke up after a moment of silence. Ye story was very touching, Elfboy, but it lacks the evidence that ours hold. Now can I kill him? He snarled and made ready to pull his sword. The story is not over, Aide spoke up, unbothered with Hank's crude suggestion. I'm still missing the final chapter. See, where your story ends, ours have another chapter. Is that so? Hank grunted and sat back down again. Well, make it quick then. My hands are itching to slit ye, throat so ye will shut up and I can sleep. I have a busy day tomorrow. Then I'll make it quick, Aide mused. A few elves had managed to hide themselves in places that humans today still have no knowledge about. With the war over, they settled down in the Aide woods. So, Hank snapped, and they lived happily ever after. Not quite, Aide humorlessly said. You see, after the old king died, his tomb was plated in gold and decorated with gemstones. It was a symbolic gesture to resemble the arrow that was used to kill him, an arrow made of gold with a diamond tip. Yeah, ye elves probably wanted the murderous arrow to be extra special since it was to kill the king, Hank growled. Ye are sick creatures. But here's the funny thing, Aide said and lifted a brow. Emea, may I borrow a piece of jewelry from your bag? The men all got a confused expression on their face, but Hank straight up shouted, Ha! As if we will lend anything. Ye probably just want to steal our fortune and then kill us. Aide turned away from Hank and instead focused on Emea. Emea, please. Emea stared at him for a second. His eyes were so sober, so serious, yet at the same time so humble and respectful. After a moment of consideration, she slowly dived her hand into her satchel. Me, lady, don't do it. Hank bickered. He just wants to. Enough, Hank, she snapped. Stop seeing danger at every turn. Show him a little trust. Trust? Hank spluttered. He's an elf. The last time we decided to trust an elf, they murdered our king. No, we didn't, Aide said and looked at him. And here's why. Emea handed him one of her gold bracelets with rubies on, one of the ones she had been supposed to wear on her wedding day. When Aide reached out to grab it, the whole crowd held their breaths. And then it happened. The minute his fingers came in contact with the gold, a wish of a scorching sounded, and the bracelet fell to the snow. Aide retracted his hand and curled his lip back in pain. When he uncovered his hand for the crowd to see, they saw 2 small burn marks on the tip of his fingers. That is why we didn't kill him. He snapped and yanked his glove back on. Gold burns us. Don't even get me started on gemstones. Emea's eyes were wide as cannonballs. With shaky hands, she slowly picked up her bracelet from the snow and saw how it was totally unharmed. No marks or anything. That was more than you could say about Aide's hand. My God, Dash spoke up for the first time. By the 4 seas. Hank seemed speechless for once. He gaped at Aide's hand, even though it was covered up by his glove again, as if he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. It was the ultimate evidence. We couldn't possibly have made that shot if the arrow was made out of solid gold and had a diamond tip, Aide said to the speechless crowd. Not even if we had gloves on. Let me demonstrate. Aide held out his hand, once more to Emea, who was reluctant to let him hold the bracelet again. It's okay, Aide said and curved a reassuring smile to his lips. It's just for 2 seconds. Emea hesitantly handed him the bracelet again, but flinched the moment it touched his glove. It burned right through the leather within 2 seconds and scorched his hand again. Aide hissed and dropped the bracelet. When he pulled off his glove and showed his hand to the stunned crowd, they all saw the red circle of burned skin where the gold had touched him. Unbelievable, Dash said and ran a hand through his hair. Just unbelievable. It really was. There was no way an elf could have held that arrow. Just 2 seconds in contact with that bracelet had scorched Aide's hand, and that was with his glove on. To make a shot that precise, they would have had to have held onto the arrow for minutes, adjusting to the wind and waiting for the perfect moment where the king was in front of the window. It simply wouldn't be possible. As impressive as the shot was, it wasn't made by an elf, which could only mean one thing. It's true, Emea said and broke the silence. It's all true. There's more, Aide said. The old king's grave. It's covered in gold and jewels. It's a precaution the young king took after his father was murdered. Tell me, does it say anywhere in your history books that elves have a weakness for valuable materials? The answer was unanimous, but no one said it. No. Aide clearly read that from their faces. Exactly. It's because we've kept it secret in all the time we have existed. I've just broken one of the highest elf laws by telling you. So what? Hank said with a dry throat. He still looked completely dazed. So my point is, how could the king's son know about it? Aide said and folded his hands. He buried his father in gold, but why? To make it look pretty for the public. He made a light scoff. He could have used bronze or craved it in stone, which would have been much less expensive. You humans pay for your houses in gold that you struggle to earn. If the king had enough gold to encase his father, then why are your taxes so high? Now wait a minute, Dashiell interrupted. Are you saying that? We elves believe it was the king's son who assassinated his father. He framed it on the elves with an arrow and mocked us by making it gold, Aide harshly said. He found out about our secret somehow and used it against us. He knew we'd never stand up and show the world our weakness, so we got forced to take the blame instead. It was all a scam. Wait one damn minute, ye filthy creature, Hank seethed and stood up. Why in the world would he get someone to murder his old man? If we lived in peace, why would he start a war? Why is it that women have no rights? Aide calmly asked. The question seemed so sidetracked that Hank got a baffled look on his face. What? What does that have to do with anything? Everything, Aide said and leaned forward. It's racism. The old king's son didn't like the elves, simply because we looked different from him and had other customs. He murdered us for it and took the dragons as well because we shared the same blood. When there was nothing else to target, he went for the women. He turned and looked at Amaya. She blinked surprised. Women were skinnier, smaller, had lighter voices, different proportions, and other body parts. Of course, he couldn't kill them. That would be barbaric, and who should carry his sons? So instead, he restrained them like dogs and made sure they were only allowed to follow his command. Aide finished and left everyone silent again. No one spoke, but Amaya was exploding inside. Everything, every last word she had been dying to say for years, had just come out of a man and an elf, no less. Bloody hell, Dash silently said. He had been running his hands through his hair for the past half hour. It was like he couldn't fathom that this night was real. None of them could. Finally, Amaya broke the silence. So, what can we conclude? All as one, they turned and looked at Hank, their leader. He looked up shocked and crossed his arms. Don't look at me. I'm as confused about all this as the rest of ye are. I believe all that Aide has told us tonight is true, Amaya continued. He's shown us more solid evidence than King Ragnar ever has. Aide sent her a smile and nod of appreciation. He was grateful for her support. So what now? Dashiell said and scratched his head. What's our plan from here? I think Aide should join us, Amaya said and looked around to the men. What? Hank snapped and looked at her in shock. How did we get there? But why shouldn't he? Amaya argued and crossed her arms. He wants the same things as us, and he's a skillful fighter. That is true, Dash said reluctantly, but still. Still what? Amaya said and looked between Hank and Dash. He believes in our cause, he knows how to fight, and he wants to help. Aren't those the criteria you need to join the group?" Hank and Dash exchanged a look while Emea waited for an answer. They didn't say anything, but their eyes gave her all the answers she needed. They were hesitating because he was an elf. Emea was about to open her mouth, but Aide beat her to it. "I get your hesitation," Aide said and looked at Hank. Hank stared back with a defensive look. "This is not an easy decision. You've been taught to believe something your whole life, and in just one night you have to change it all." "The elf has brains," Hank snorted and narrowed his eyes at him. "I've got to admit, this is a lot to take in." "I can imagine," Aide said and nodded his head. "Maybe I can make your decision easier." Hank looked back at Aide with a frown. "I doubt that, elf boy." "I'm sure you know the myths of the elven abilities," Aide said and raised a brow. "What if I told you some of them were true?" Hank frowned once more and glared suspiciously at him. "Which of them are we taking about?" "All you need to know is that my skill set is wide," Aide replied and looked him into the eyes. "And that is without my advantages. I know most of your men are farmers who have never handled a weapon before in their lives. I can help teach you how to fight," he said to the crowd and looked at Emea. "All of you." Emea felt a pull in her stomach. Did that mean he would teach her how to fight as well? "I am more than capable enough to train my men myself," Hank commented and crossed his arms. "I don't doubt that," Aide said, "but as the group grows, you might need help. If anything, I know the woods better than anyone." Emea was growing impatient. "I say you sleep on it, Hank. If you by tomorrow have made up your mind about letting him in, we take our decisions from there." "Then I should take my farewell," Aide said and rose to his feet. "It's been a long night, and I can imagine you'd like to get some rest." As if on cue, Emea yawned. As tired as she was, she didn't want the night to end, and she definitely didn't want Aide to leave. "Will we see you at dawn?" "I will return in the morrow," Aide affirmed. "I will await your decision then." "Then so be it," Hank said and stood up too. "But I will hear none of this until the sun is upon us," he said loudly to his men. "I will make my decision in peace." "Of course," Emea said soberly and looked at Aide, who was pulling on his hood. "Until the morning, then." Some damn ale would have been nice right about now. Hank grumbled and spat on the ground. "But we just had to bring the woman." Emea doubted she was the only one to get little sleep that night. Despite the fact that she hadn't slept properly since the night before she left home, she still couldn't fall asleep. Her body was screaming exhaustion, but her mind was wide awake. When she had left Roches, she would never in her wildest dreams have dreamt of the adventures she would meet outside the city. Her mind was overdosing on excitement, especially now when the game just changed. She couldn't actually believe what had happened tonight was real. A part of her considered if she might actually have fallen asleep and dreamt the whole thing, if it wasn't because her mind was so wide awake. Aide had given her the best shock of her life by revealing his true self to them. It finally explained why he wore a mask and a hood. His features would have given him away. Despite his hated race, he had devoted his life to saving humans. The same humans that made him and his cousin's existence almost impossible. That, of course, raised the inevitable question: why? A few feet away, she could hear Hank tossing and turning on the ground. She could only imagine how hard he must have it. Hank was old-fashioned, even despite his wishes of newer ways. He had a hard time leaving the old ways behind, and meeting Aide had put him up to the ultimate challenge. Could he change? And most importantly, could the world? With so many questions and that much anticipation, Emea didn't close an eye all night. In fact, when the small gleams of morning light started to seep through the trunks of the trees, Emea had been ready for hours. She had neatly folded up her covers and placed them under herself while she waited for the rest of the men to awaken. Slowly, one by one, the men yawned and stretched their limbs before sitting up and looking around. Nobody said anything as Hank, Dash, and the rest of them all woke and started readying themselves for what could be the revolution of a new partnership. They loaded the carriage in silence, and only when they had saddled up the horses, Dash awkwardly cleared his throat. So, have you made up your mind? Hank fiddled with the reins of his horse, seeming unsure of how to reply. When a few seconds passed and he still didn't reply, Dash sighed and looked at the ground. I guess we'll wait for the elf to return. Where is he anyways? Hank bickered and gave up on tightening the reins. He said dawn, it's dawn now. Maybe he changed his mind. Dash suggested while nuzzling his horse's neck. Maybe he cowered away. We have no time to wait for him. Hank snapped and adjusted the stirrup. We have to keep moving. He missed his chance. He finished and made ready to mount his horse. Emea had already opened her mouth to object when a voice from behind them spoke. I apologize for the delay. I had an errand. The whole group turned around and found Aide coming out from within the trees. He was dressed just like yesterday, only today he didn't bother wearing his hood up. His long, silver hair blew softly in the morning air as he approached Hank. Hank had turned as well and looked as if he had just eaten a lemon. Why do ye always have to creep around the woods like that? Hank, Emea hissed and sent him a reproachful stare. Why couldn't he just behave like an adult sometimes? It's okay, Aide replied and gave Emea a smile before turning back to Hank. So I assume you've made up your mind. Hank struggled to keep his cool, that much was obvious. I have, as a matter of fact. And Hank chewed on another curse or two before crossing his arms. And if it had been up to me alone, I would have turned ye down and slain ye on ye feet. Hank, Emea growled and angrily stomped her foot. But Hank continued and sent her a scowl. It's not. I have to think of everyone around me as well. She didn't see that one coming. Emea stayed silent and allowed him to continue. I know if me lovely wife had been here, she would have told me to get off my chunky hiney and do what's best, Hank said and shook his head as if the pure imagination of his wife's reprimand brought mortification to his soul. So trust me when I say I'm not doing it for me own good. He growled and looked at Aide. But for the good of the whole world. Does that mean he's in? Emea asked hopefully and felt a pull of excitement in her stomach. Hank sighed and looked at Aide once more. He's in. Emea was just about to burst into a happy dance when Hank pointed a fat finger at Aide, who stood calmly and listened. But on one condition. "What is that?" Aide calmly asked. He didn't even seem the least bit bothered with Hank's temper. "If ye mess up even once," Hank growled and took a threatening step closer. "Even just the tiniest mess up, I get to kick ye, skinny little elf arse, back to where ye came from." Aide seemed to be a little amused and cracked a smile. "That seems fair enough." "Good," Hank barked and turned to his horse again. It settled then. Hank looked at it with a grimace as Aide, and the rest of the group waited for him to shake it. Hank seemed reluctant and finally said, "Let's just stick to a verbal agreement." Aide chuckled again and lowered his hand. "As you wish." Emea couldn't believe how easy Aide took it all. Hank was being incredibly rude and acting as if Aide had elf germs, but Aide just took it with a smile and silently took a few steps back as Hank mounted his horse. "We have wasted enough time here," Hank finally said when he was sitting solidly in his saddle. "Saddle up, men, and let's get moving." While all of the men went to their horses, Hank turned his attention to Aide. "Grab ye horse as well. We have a long way ahead." "I don't have a horse," Aide answered. "I prefer to travel by foot." Hank scoffed and spat on the ground. "Then it's going to be a long walk, elf boy. We're heading to a village close to the shore, and we ain't stopping because ye feet are sore." Hank, for the love of Emea, started, but Aide just calmly held up his hand. "Don't worry about me," he said, and sent Hank a challenging stare. "You just worry about leading the way." Emea was getting tired of their boyish rivalry. "Aide, there's room on the carriage." "No, ye heard the elf," Hank said and raised a mocking brow. "He prefers to walk, so let him walk." Emea was so close to whacking him off his high horse, quite literally. But Aide took his crassness with a chuckle and crossed his arms. "Let's get moving, then." Hank kicked his horse into motion with a final stare at Aide before he rode to the front and started their caravan. The real journey began now. Their caravan traveled long that day without many breaks. Emea suspected Hank to be testing Aide's perseverance, but Aide never fell behind. Hour went by and they made it out of the Barshan woods and into open ground. For hours, they rode the open plains without any problem caused by mischievous roots or mud. None of the men spoke to Aide, and Emea could feel the thick tension in the air as they reached yet another forest. They started heading through the bushes and trees and kept an eye out for thugs. This part of Senworth Kingdom was known for their large forests filled with thugs. They called this particular forest the Thugwoods. As they headed deeper into the woods, Emea noticed how Aide became more and more tense. His eyes were narrowed as he gazed at the trees, and she saw him jerk his head to the side several times when he clearly heard something she didn't. The sun was slowly setting, and the light was becoming dimmer. At one point, Hank pulled the group to a stop and ordered the men to set up camp. All men had their usual tasks. Some made sure the horses were watered and fed, while others collected wood and set up tents. Emea's only job was to unload the rabbits from the carriage and bring them to the fireplace. In the middle of all the settling, Emea lost track of Aide. After she had brought the rabbits to the fire, She searched around the camp but couldn't find him. Had he wandered off? Maybe it had something to do with that errand he had to do this morning. Whatever it was, Amaya didn't see him until he showed up after they'd eaten. The men hadn't even noticed he disappeared while they ate and drank their dinner. He came back from the woods and seemed completely unconcerned by the fact that no one offered him any food. He looked towards the men around the fire, but chose to sit by a tree by the outline of the camp. He's kinda strange, isn't he? Dashiell sat down next to Amaya and followed her stare. He's acting all mysterious and stuff. It's like he won't reveal too much of himself. Can you blame him? Amaya reasoned and took another shy glance at him. He was carving an arrow, it seemed. And to be fair, he's actually revealed quite much. His species, his weakness, their story. But what about his name? Dashiell frowned. Why can't he tell us that? Do you really think that the elf customs are that strict about not telling your name? Yes, I do, Amaya said and put down her mug of soup on the ground. He hasn't lied to us so far. Maybe when some time passes, he'll open up more. Maybe, Dash shrugged. In any case, he's a weird fella. Don't call him that, Amaya said with a soft smile. He's just different. The guy has silver hair. It's weird. It's probably normal where he comes from. Amaya argued, but then sighed. I think I'll go to bed. I didn't sleep well last night. I don't think any of us did, Dashiell agreed. Good night, Em. Sleep tight. Don't let the elf bugs bite. Amaya rolled her eyes. Very clever. G-night Dash. She headed to her small tent and got cozy under the pelts. The air was lukewarm, but it was still cold enough to need a blanket. Amaya felt her body grow tired after a minute or two. With all the excitement from the past few days, it would be nice to finally get a good night's sleep. Somewhere in the distance, she heard an owl howl. She was lulled to sleep by the comforting sounds of the forest. A loud scream awakened Amaya in the middle of the night and made her jump out of her pelts. Now that she was conscious, she heard the sound of blades meeting blades and the roars of fighting men. They were under attack. Amaya's heart leaped into her throat, and she crawled to the edge of her tent and stuck her head out. The fireplace was out, so all she could see were dark shapes fighting. Weapons glinted in the moonlight and cries of pain carried throughout the camp. Unarmed as she was, she quickly rumbled through her satchel to find the small dagger that Aide had given her in the alley. It was in there somewhere. Well, if it isn't the missing Rochess heir. Amaya let out a startled shriek when a pair of forceful hands yanked her out of the tent and onto her feet. This man was clearly a thug and smelled of old mead and rotten fish. He smiled grimly down at her and revealed a golden tooth. Hello there, Missy. Pleasure to meet you. Tell me, how much did they want for you again? He chuckled when Amaya screamed. Help, somebody help me. Everyone is a bit busy at the moment, the thug chuckled, but got distracted by a jingle from her bag. Oh, what do we have in here? He yanked the bag out of her hands. Well, if it isn't my favorite sound in the world. To emphasize his point, he shook her bag. Tell me, doll, do you have anything for me, too? Maybe beneath your skirt. Get off me, you big pile of stool. Amaya seethed. She spat him right in the face when she couldn't think of anything else to do. A murderous expression formed on the thug's face as he wiped his cheek. "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. I was only going to fuck your front, but now you're gone, get it both ways." Amaya didn't even know what he was talking about. All she knew was that she was in danger yet again, and as he had pointed out, everyone else were busy. The thug raised his hand in the air to slap her, if not to punch her. All she saw was that one moment, his hand was flying through the air. The next moment, an arrow was pierced through it. "My hand." The thug screamed bloody murder and released Emea with his other hand. "My fucking hand." Emea stumbled back and snatched the satchel back while the thug was busy screaming his head off. "Take that, you filthy pig." And then he was there. Aide's characteristic shape appeared from the shadows, and within seconds he had brought the thug to the ground. He punched him into the soil with a bone-crushing fist, and then yanked him closer by his collar. "Lay a hand on another woman, and next time it won't be your hand that gets pierced." "Got it," he hissed. His voice was lethal. The thug cried in pains but glared up at him. "Shooting a man while he's not looking. What kind of coward are you? Why don't you fight me for real, huh? Man to man." "I don't see any men around," Aide flatly commented. "Now run off and take your boys with you." The thug groaned when Aide pushed him back into the dirt. The thug then quickly shot to his feet and ran away, which was probably for the best. Aide looked furious. He turned to Emea, who was watching the whole thing, and granted her a look. "Are you okay? Did he harm you?" Emea quickly shook her head. "No, but Aide, your face. He wasn't wearing a mask. He had his hood up, but that didn't cover his silver hair, which had slid to the front." "It doesn't matter," Aide said, but in that moment a new thug came up to them. He emerged from the shadow without any signs and went for Aide. He had a dagger in each hand and was way taller than Goldie Tooth. Aide was quick on his feet as always. He avoided getting sliced to smithereens by leaning back and made a backwards flip. His feet hit the thug under his chin and knocked his head backwards. He stumbled back a few feet but regained balance. His mouth, however, was bleeding, and Emea was pretty sure Aide had knocked a few of his teeth out. The thug launched after Aide again, daggers ready to kill. Even though she had seen Aide fight before, she never got tired of seeing just how smoothly and comfortably he moved around. It was as if he was born to do this, to be a warrior, and perhaps even a savior. Aide narrowly avoided getting cut in the face by the dagger, but it sliced through his hood and tipped it off. The thug froze solid by the sight of Aide's long ears. "An elf, why you're a northern elf," he exclaimed in horror. "Really? Hadn't noticed," Aide scoffed indifferently. Apparently he wasn't too concerned about him finding out. "You still want to fight me, or do you feel like going for a run?" The thug actually seemed to consider staying and fighting, but a moment later he ran for his life. "Wow," Emea whispered. Adrenaline still coursed through her body with a rapid drumming, but now that all the fighting seemed to have ended, she took a deep breath. What happened? How did this start? "Elf boy," Hank's voice roared from across the camp. He came limping up to them with the rest of the men closely behind him. What was that? What was what? Aide asked. Ye, let him run. What if he comes back later with more people? I don't kill for sport, Aide replied and turned to face him. That thug was no threat to the world. He just wanted your valuables. Just wanted our Hank turned vermilion. Maybe ye creatures can't stand being around precious objects, but the rest of us would like to keep them in our possession. Next time ye kill, or I'll make sure to kill ye. Hank, relax, Emea tried. Aide just saved me again. I think we should just be happy he was here to help. We could have handled those morons without him, Hank bickered. But ye couldn't. I told you, it was a bad idea to bring a woman to this sort of thing. The messy business is best left to the men. Where I come from, women fight alongside men. Aide cut in with a hard stare. Teach them to fight and trust me. You'll never meet a deadlier enemy on the battlefield. Hank opened his mouth to argue back, but the words froze on his tongue. Instead, he closed his mouth and scowled towards Aide. Emea guessed that Hank could probably picture his own wife with a sword and realized Aide was right. From what he had told about his wife, she was a woman with gumption. Let's just do a head count, Hank finally growled. Raise your hand if you're still alive. The men all raised their hands and Hank did a quick count. After a moment or two, he nodded content. No lives taken. Good. I say we pack up and get the hell out of this thug-infested forest. He grunted and hiked up in his pants, then grimaced. He had a nasty cut right below his knee. Get to work. The men did as they were told and started packing up. Aide turned to leave as well, but Emea grabbed his arm. Wait, Aide. He turned and rose a brow. What? Emea took a short moment to collect herself. Aide's lips twitched in a little smile. No worries. It keeps me on my feet. Emea smiled nervously and looked at the ground. Right. I just can't help but feel like I'm in the way. Maybe Hank is right. Aide turned to fully face her and took a step closer. Hank is not right, Emea. You're more valuable to them than they give you credit for. Just wait and see. Emea lifted her head and frowned, confused at him. How do you know? Aide simply smiled. Because you have fire in your soul, and fire burns. Emea couldn't help but smile when he turned and left. He joined the men in packing up their things while Emea lingered. Fire, if Aide saw fire in her, it couldn't be all wrong. He didn't seem like a man who lied, so he had to be telling the truth. Fire was a powerful weapon, but maybe she would need more than just her inner fire to fight. She would have to get an actual weapon, something that could cut. They got the camp packed down again, and soon they were on their way. The moon was still high in the sky and shone their way ahead. Every twig that snapped and every odd shape made Emea whip her head around. She noticed that Aide was on alert, too. Traveling at night was always risky, not just because of dangerous animals, but because of dangerous thugs. And as they had just proven, this forest was filled with them. Finally, they came to the outlines of a city called Smithers. It was only a few miles from the shore, and so they decided it was the best sleeping option. But the gates are closed. It's way past midnight, Dashiell pointed out. We won't be allowed in. Fucking laws, Hank bickered. I tell ye, if we succeed in this, the first change in law I'll make is to keep the gates open. And the bars for that matter. I believe this is where you come in, Dashiell said and turned to Emea. Perhaps you can speak to the guardian of the gate. Maybe persuade him to open up and find us some accommodation for the rest of the night. The men all turned to Emea. They were tired from walking and riding, and some were wounded from the fight. They needed a proper place to sleep. Let me see what I can do, Emea said. After that, she took the walk up to the city gates and knocked on the giant wooden door. This was it, her moment to show that she could contribute, that she wasn't just a useless asset. A few seconds later, an old, bitter voice met her on the other side. The small porthole was opened, and an old man glanced out at her. Who's there? My name is M, Emea said, deciding not to use her real name. Since her parents had set up the bounty on her, it was probably for the best. I come with a group of 28 men, and we are tired and wounded. May we be granted passage. It's way past sunset. I can't let you in. The old man barked. He shut the porthole again. Please, sir, Emea said. We've traveled very far and we are desperate. Not my problem. Leave or I summon the hounds. We have gems, Emea said and switched to his native tongue. Perhaps speaking his language could bode well and maybe ease him up. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, diamonds. We will gladly pay the man who could offer us some safety and a place to sleep. Are you our man? There was a short silence. Emea nervously tipped on her feet while she waited for the man to consider her offer. Finally, she heard a shuffle and the window was opened again. Diamonds, eh? The old man replied suspiciously in his native tongue. Let me see. Emea quickly dived into her satchel and ripped off a few gemstones from her corset. She showed them to the old man. His eyes expanded to cannonballs by the sight, but then he quickly coughed and looked at Emea. Well, I'm not allowed to open the doors to strangers, but you speak our tongue. Maybe you're not a stranger. How many did you say you were? 28, Emea quickly replied. She felt the courage light up in her stomach. Hope was not lost. Do you think there's a place for us to sleep in your town? I may be able to pull some threads, the old man slowly said while scratching his chin. But it's going to cost you. We will gladly pay. Emea smiled brightly. The old man mumbled something unintelligible, but then slowly opened the gates. Emea turned and waved to the men that they had been granted access. She was met with a cheer. The men all started walking into the city and thanked the old man many times as they passed him. The old man seemed grumpy by all the people, but the price he was promised soothed his mood. When everybody was inside, Emea turned and looked around. Where's Aide? He said he wouldn't join us. Hank yawned behind his hand. Something about him sleeping best in the woods. All that weird shite he keeps sprouting. But, Emea said with a sinking feeling, a part of her was disappointed. She wanted Aide to be proud of her, to praise her with a smile for how good a job she had done. She realized now she was being stupid. Let's just find a place to sleep, M. said in a tired voice. He'll be back tomorrow. The town of Smithers was a beautiful place. The market was painted earthly blue and green colors, and the houses were covered in thick ivy. The salesmen sold everything from herbs and potions to fine armory and weapons. "Everyone knows the drill," Hank said and looked to his men. "We know what we're fighting for, and we know what we want. Target the men who stand alone and spread the word. Those who don't speak the common tongue, move past. We meet here again in 3 hours. Got it?" The men all nodded and spread out in different directions. Some went alone, others went in groups. Since Emea had done her part, she was left to do what she wanted. And Emea knew exactly what she wanted. "You want what?" The bitter weapons salesman drawled at her. "This is no booth for a woman. Go check out the seashell jewelry down the road." "But a scram toots. "The woman said she wants to look at your weapons." Emea froze when a shadow covered her own. The sound of Aide's melodious voice, sounding so hard, was even more surprising. The salesman looked up at Aide, who towered behind Emea in his black attire and hood. He had hidden his silver hair thoroughly today, and his ears were covered by the cloak. The only feature that stood out suspiciously was his pale skin. Smithers was a town located close to the warm eastern borders that was lit with the sun all day long. Pale skin was not seen very often around here. The weapons salesman narrowed his eyes suspiciously at him. "And who are you?" "I don't believe that's any of your concern," Aide coldly replied. "The woman wants to look at your throwing knives and daggers. Do you have a problem with that?" Emea glanced up at Aide and found him staring harshly at the salesman. The salesman eventually caved and snarled at him. "Whatever." While he pulled down a different assortment of his weapons, Aide's eyes landed on Emea. She smiled gratefully up at him and was happy to see him. After he had disappeared last night, she was glad to see that he was fine. Aide gave her a quick smile and then turned his attention back to the salesman. He laid out the assortment of knives and daggers on the counter and crossed his arms. "Here you go. Does the lady want to try them too?" He snorted. "She will," Aide replied before Emea had a chance to respond herself. The salesman scoffed and rolled his eyes, but then left them to it and resumed manning his desk. It was obvious he didn't approve of a woman seeking to buy a weapon. "Don't mind him," Aide said and picked up a dagger. "Here, try holding this." How do I hold it?" Emea hesitated when Aide held out the small dagger for her. "Let me show you." He smiled. He gently took her hand and placed the shaft in her palm. "Always hold the blade downwards, like this. I know it feels more comfortable to hold it the other way, but it's easier to stab someone this way if the situation should demand it." Emea cringed a little at his words. She didn't want to imagine stabbing anyone, but at least this way she knew she wasn't the one getting stabbed either. "All right, now hold it up like this," Aide instructed and pulled her hand up to chest level. It's a classic stock praise stand. You hold your dagger prepared that way, and maybe a lantern in your other hand like this if it's dark. Always keep your weapon on top and your other hand under. "Wow," Emea breathed impressed and looked at the dagger. "I had no idea." The human race doesn't teach women how to protect themselves. Why am I not surprised? Aide commented and started inspecting the throwing knives carefully. Does the elven men teach their women how to handle weapons? Amaya asked curiously. Aide selected a blade. Of course we do. Why shouldn't we? I don't know. Because we're women and we can't carry a weapon. Being a woman is not a legitimate reason not to teach someone something. Just like you can't determine whether or not a person is good or bad by the color of their skin or their religion, Aide clarified and studied the dagger he had selected. I think it's time we stop judging people by what they have or don't have, but rather what they contribute to this world. Here, try this one. He jumped subjects so fast that Emea had to fight to keep up. One moment he was teaching her a valuable life lesson, the next they were testing weapons. This is a double-edged iron dagger, he told and placed it in her hand after removing the other. See the way the blade is almost triangular. That makes the dagger perfect for throwing. Emea clutched the little dagger in her hand and felt how lightweight it was. It was like holding a small piece of bark. I see. Is it supposed to be so? Thin, won't it bend? Aide smiled and took the dagger from her again. No, it won't bend. This blade is forged slender so it travels faster and easier through the air. In close combat, it won't do much good, but with speed and a bit of distance. Aide aimed the dagger towards a small wooden target in the booth and then fired it. It hit bullseye in the center and made Emea drop her jaw. It can do great damage. That was amazing. Emea gaped and eagerly looked up at Aide. Will you teach me how to do that? Do you want me to? The way he asked that, so nonchalantly and so easily, had something moving inside her. It felt like when she had crossed the laws and left Roches. Only 1,000,000 times better. Yes, I do. Can you? Aide slowly picked up another dagger and held it out to her. Of course, but it'll take time and patience. You won't learn overnight. Hold this. Emea smiled brightly and took the small dagger. Relax, Emea, Aide said, and to her surprised, cracked a little smile. I'm not above reviving a hug. But let's focus on the knife in your hand first, yeah. Emea had completely forgotten that she was armed. She had never been that before in her life. Oh God, I'm sorry. Right, the knife. Do you like these? Aide said, thankfully moving the conversation along and gestured to the dagger she was holding. Try it out. Try it out. She stuttered. I've never thrown a knife before. Let me guide you, Aide patiently smiled. May I? Emea nodded carefully, and so Aide stepped up behind her. He slowly turned her towards the target and wrapped his hands around her wrist. A heat developed somewhere in Emea's body by the touch of his calloused fingers. Hold the dagger like this, he instructed while he molded her palm to grip the dagger correctly. You hold the blade between your fingers like so, and then line it up to your eyesight. Aide pressed his jawline to the back of her head and aimed the dagger for her. When you aim, you want to keep both your eyes open. Once you have your target locked down, you throw. Emea exhaled slowly. The feel of Aide's breath so close to her ear made her stomach twist and her breath become heavy. Something in his voice relaxed her. yet thrilled her at the same time. It was so confusing. Lift your arm like this, Aide continued, unaware of her inner turmoil. No further back than 5 inches from your ear. Then, with as much force as you can, throw while keeping your eyes on your target. Her heart fluttered nervously when Aide suddenly pulled back. She realized he wanted her to actually throw now. So she did everything he had instructed her to do. She took her aim and then threw the small dagger. It traveled through the air, but when it came to the target board, it thumped against the thing and clunked down to the ground. A sinking feeling landed in her stomach. Not bad for a first try, Aide observed from her side. What do you mean? The dagger just thumped against the wood. How is that not bad? You hit the target, didn't you? Aide pointed out. The knife didn't stick, but you hit. That means you have good aim. That's something to work on. He might have had a point, but that still didn't make her feel any less embarrassed about her first shot with a weapon. Are you two lovebirds going to buy something or not? The rude salesman asked after angrily picking up the fallen dagger. If not, then move on. Actually, we will buy something, Aide said. We'll have 6 of those daggers right there and this one. He picked up another dagger from the selection, a longer one with a beautiful handle. Name a price. The salesman narrowed his eyes at Aide, but after a moment of bargaining over the price, Emea finally got her knives. She had never felt so exhilarated in her entire life. She had both weapons, money, and the support of a man with her, a man who was going to teach her how to use those weapons. If there had ever been any doubts about leaving Rochess in her mind, they evaporated in that moment. This was where she wanted to be. So tell me, Emea asked as Aide and her started strolling down the colorful street. What is it like where you come from? Aide pursed his lips for a second before curtly replying. It's nice. Nice, Emea echoed with a raised brow. That's it, just nice. I haven't been home in years. I don't know if it's still the same. Where is your home? She curiously asked. Where did he come from? What made an elf decide to join the humans in their chaotic world instead of just living the safe life? Out here, he was in constant danger of being spotted or revealed. Not to mention every night when he fired into the dark cities and fought criminals. What motivated him? Aide hesitated to reply, but finally sighed. I'm from the deep north, that's all I'll say. Emea stopped walking when something occurred to her. Don't you trust me? Aide stopped too and looked back at her. What? You don't want to talk about yourself or reveal anything too personal, Emea said and frowned. Are you afraid I'll tell the world? Aide slowly walked up to her. His deep crystal eyes met hers and made her breath falter. No, I'm not. I trust you, Emea, but I've learned from bitter experience that the less people know about me, the better chance they have of surviving. I make a lot of enemies doing what I do, he said. If you ask too much, you could become a target for them, and I don't want that happening. Emea swallowed and blinked up at him. She had never considered that. Okay. He nodded and then started walking again. Why don't you tell me about your home instead? What made you leave Rochess? Emea started walking too and cleared her throat. Ooh, that's a complicated story. The gist of it is that I felt suffocated and oppressed there. I was about to get married to a man I'd never met, and I didn't have a say in the matter. I just couldn't take it anymore. I've never understood that about the human race, Aide pondered out loud while he observed the passing people. You always marry your children to the best they can get. The highest bidder, so to say. Isn't that normal? Emea frowned. Parents wanting the best for their children. Perhaps, Aide replied. I guess I just always thought love was the best you could do. Emea's thoughts paused for a moment. What he was saying made so much logical sense, but it still blew her off her feet. Nobody thought like that anymore. Everyone was so obsessed with getting money and land, richness and glory, that the idea of marrying for love was considered ludicrous. Even when born into a rich family, money was still first priority. Love always came afterwards, or well, it was supposed to. They walked in a couple of minutes of silence, simply just admiring the beautiful town of Smithers. Emea wasn't really sure how to respond. Aide had made it clear he didn't like to talk about his origins, so she couldn't ask him if love was something he had ever experienced himself. Emea had, of course, never been in love before. She had loved the town of Roches and the children that she was allowed to occasionally play with as a child, but she had never been in love with anyone, let alone met anyone who she could fall for. Her father had made sure of that. Perhaps this journey would bring along her true love as well. We should be getting back to inn, Aide said after a while. I heard Hank say to meet up after 3 hours. It's been nearly 2.5. Aide, may I ask you something? Emea asked when a thought suddenly popped into her mind. You can certainly ask, Aide chuckled. I can't promise I'll reply. Where did you sleep last night? She asked curiously. Hank said something about you and the woods. Did you sleep there? Aide simply smiled at her, then looked at the ground. I think we should walk back to the inn. Better to be there in good time than too late. Emea sighed, but then nodded. Okay, so she guessed he wouldn't answer that. She couldn't be sure why, and she would probably never find out. It was a little frustrating. They started walking back to the inn in silence, none of them really looking at each other. Aide seemed occupied with watching the people of the town while Emea tried to think of anything new to say. She came up blank. When they finally got to the inn, some of the men were already there, including Hank. Oh, I see the elf boy finally showed up. He grunted and threw a glance at Aide. Nice of ye to join us. Hank, Emea tiredly said. Why couldn't he just talk nicely to him? Maybe keep the nicknaming down while we're in town, Dashiell spoke up. I think it's best we don't go around saying elf. Whatever, Hank said and looked around to his men. All right, lads, let's hit the tavern. Tomorrow we adjourn to the shore, and that's where we'll start training, so drink up. Tomorrow ye'll wish ye were born a lady. The group arrived to the shore around 10 a.m. in the forenoon. Some of the men had been up till late at night drinking away their guts and then throwing it up that morning. They were beat, but Hank was fire and lightning. All right, men, he said while he sternly walked up and down the file of men who wanted to learn the skill of handling a sword. Today ye step into a proud rank, the rank of men who walks with a sword. He glanced at the men who looked somewhat sleepy. I'll teach ye how to fight, defend, and attack every man ye meet. Ye'll be indestructible when I'm done with ye." Emea scoffed to herself. While it all sounded great, there was just one problem. His speech was crafted for men, and so was his training routine. They were all lined up on the beach, each holding a heavy sword in their hands. Emea was sitting on a lump of wood and watched from a distance while she cleaned the pelt of a rabbit. It was so unfair. When she had asked Hank if she could join, he had awkwardly looked at the ground and muttered some ludicrous excuse about how the sword would be too heavy or the men might find it odd. It was best that she just watched from a safe distance. Oh, and then there were some rabbits she could deal with. He had walked away in a hurry. Emea put the pelt down and carefully slipped her hand into her satchel. She pulled out one of the small throwing dagger and flipped it in her hand. It was so weird, yet strangely comforting holding a weapon. A real weapon, not just a vegetable knife. "Aren't you joining them?" Emea yelped and turned in her seat to find Aide coming up to her. Today he looked different from what he used to. Instead of his black leather attire, he had opted for a pair of brown breeches and a pale tunic. He still wore his cloak, but for him wearing his hood up was mandatory. Either walk around with a cloak or get seen. This new look of his soothed him, Emea thought. The skin on his neck and clavicle bone was exposed and revealed smooth porcelain skin, plus, the tunic did something else to his torso. She liked it. Emea turned back and looked out to the men who were following Hank's motion with their swords. "I can't. They won't say it, but they don't want me learning how to fight." Aide sat down on the lump of wood next to her. A small section of his silver hair slid to his front and blew softly in the warm beach air. "Is that so? What did they tell you?" Something stupid about the sword being too heavy. Emea scoffed and rolled her eyes. "And then something about the men and my presence there. Don't you think it's stupid?" "Actually, no," Aide said and made her jerk her head to him. "What?" Aide chuckled by the sound of her defensive tone. "It actually makes sense, but it's still not an excuse for you not to learn. The sword would be too heavy for you, and the men would probably think it's weird having you standing next to them like you're just another man. You're not a man, you're a woman." "I know that," Emea snapped. "But you were the one who said we shouldn't let genders define what we were capable of. And I stand by it. But these men have been taught since the day they came out of their mother's womb that women were the softer gender," Aide said. "Even if they fight for equality for all mankind, they still need time to adjust." "Well, then why shouldn't I join them?" Emea barked and crossed her arms. "If I was up there with them, they might get more used to the idea." Aide smiled and looked down. "Yeah, but here's the thing, men have egos. Can you imagine how they would react if you turned out to better than them?" Emea paused for a moment, then frowned. "So I can't join them because they don't want their egos to get bruised." Aide bobbed his head. "Something like that, but as I said, it's still no excuse." Emea snorted, then looked down at the dagger in her hand. "I hate being a woman." "Don't ever repeat that," Aide said with a grit to his tone. "Come with me. I think it's time I teach you a lesson." "A lesson?" Emea said, confused, and swallowed. Aide stood up and started walking back towards a small forest located close to the beach. Bring your daggers. Emea jumped up and started running after him. She couldn't believe it. She was going to learn how to defend herself. It was one of her biggest dreams coming true. She followed Aide into the forest, not too deep, but just deep enough so nobody could see them. They stopped in a place with smooth ground, and Emea looked expectantly at Aide. So, what do we start with? Aide untied his cloak and eased it off. He placed it on the leafy ground and turned to Emea. What do you want to begin with? Learning how to throw or fighting close combat with a dagger? Emea froze for a moment. She realized this was the first time she had ever seen Aide without a cloak on. His silver hair fell to his mid-back and shone in the opaque light through the treetops. He was tall, thin, but muscular. He was quite attractive, Emea had to admit. Emea. Emea snapped out of her thoughts when she realized she had been starring. A pink blush crept to her cheeks as she replied, whichever one you think is best, I guess. Why don't we start with throwing, then? Aide smiled and walked up to a nearby tree. You seem to have a fondness of that in Smithers. Why don't we work on it? Emea nodded and watched as Aide pulled a small dagger out from under his sleeve. Okay, so do I just throw them? First, you need a target. Aide took his dagger and started carving into the tree. He made a circle before he edged his knife under the bark and then wiggled. The circle of bark snapped off in one piece and revealed smooth tree underneath, a clean surface to shoot at. Cool trick, Emea observed as Aide packed his dagger away again. She couldn't help but notice the dagger looked old and had something carved into it along the shaft. She didn't dare ask him what it said. She probably wouldn't get an answer either. Aide sent her a quick smile. All right, now you have a bullseye. This will be your target. Shouldn't there be rings on it? Emea questioned. She wasn't an expert in these things, but she knew that a bullseye had at least 3 circles. The closer you hit the center, the better. I think we should just focus on your throwing technique first, Aide replied and walked up to her. We'll get to the aiming later. That seemed logical. Emea fished out all 6 of her small daggers and held them up. They were completely identical, but it still felt like they were so different from each other. So, do you remember what I taught you back by the booth? Emea thought for a moment, then took one of the daggers in between her fingers and tried to imitate what he had showed her. Like this, right? Aide stepped up next to her and bended her fingers a little. There. You want to keep all your other fingers tugged in, just in case. Right, Emea nodded. Again, that made perfect sense. So now I take my aim. 5 inches from your ear. Good, Aide smiled when Emea did as instructed. Both eyes open. Wait for the wind to settle, then throw. She took a deep breath and made a slow exhale. Her eyes were targeted on the tree in front of her, but from the corner of her eye, she saw Aide walk back around her. When he stepped up behind her and steadied her hand, she realized she was shaking a bit, but it wasn't from the cold. Relax, he whispered. Keep your mind focused. Then throw. A chill went up her spine and made her cheeks flush. His voice was so enchanting. There was something about it that made her feel giddy. Emea decided she had aimed long enough. With a last exhale, she took her shot and threw the dagger at the tree. Much like the first time, the dagger thumped against the trunk and fell to the ground. She let out a frustrated sigh. I told you, it takes time to learn, Aide smiled. It doesn't magically just happen. Would be easier if it did, Emea grumbled. Can you imagine how much easier everything would be with magic? Yeah. All right, I want to try again. Emea readied the next dagger between her fingers and aimed. Come on, hit. She threw the dagger, but again it clunked against the tree. Damn. For almost an hour, they trained with the daggers. She missed the target a few times, but managed to make the dagger stick 4 times. Aide corrected her once in a while, but other than that, he just watched. Finally, when her arms were getting sore from throwing, Emea sighed and sat down on the ground. Aide sat down next to her and leaned back on his elbows. He looked up into the treetops. What do you see? Emea asked curiously and followed his stare. The light shone through the green leaves and cast a yellow sheen on the ground. The same as you, Aide smiled. Beauty, nature, life. Can I ask you something? Emea asked after a short moment. How did you learn to fight? Aide kept watching the trees, but didn't speak a word. Instead, he gave her a smile and sat up. You're very curious about me, aren't you? Emea shrugged a little. It's hard not to be. You're so different. I was going to say silent, but yes, she smiled. You're different, too. You keep so much hidden, I mean, we don't even know your real name. I just wonder what your story is. Aide chuckled a little. Even if I could tell you, I wouldn't. Is the name thing really an elf law? Aide nodded and looked up at the trees again. Thou shalt not speak thy name. Thy name is thine virtue, and shall not be spoken until thine heart you shall give. Emea blinked stunned. That was beautiful. Is that how the law sounds? One of them, anyways. Aide smiled and gave a vague shrug. It is, of course, roughly translated into the common tongue. It sounds a bit different in the Elven. How many laws do you have? Emea asked, interested. It seemed he didn't mind opening up about his kind as long as he didn't reveal anything about himself. A few more, Aide replied. I won't bore you with reciting them. I think maybe we should be heading back. They must be wondering where you are by now. Emea scoffed and looked onto the ground. I still don't get why they won't at least try to accept me. It's like they're not even trying at all. Why do you keep seeking their approval? Aide asked and rose a brow. You don't need them to tell you how great you are. You think I'm great? Emea shyly asked. It felt a little weird to be asking him that, but he brought it up. This is what I don't understand about humans, Aide said and stood up. You should know that you are great. You should know that those men out there don't determine whether or not you can do things, he said and pointed to the beach. But most of all, you should know that no matter what people tell you, they don't have the right to pass judgment. You are your own master. That's all great, but that's not how our world works, Aide, Emea said and looked at the ground again. It might be different where you come from, but women here get taught to look up to men, not the other way around. This is a man's world. She heard the leaves crunch under his feet, and then Aide crouched down in front of her. The first time I saw you in Bart, I saw a flicker in your eyes. The second night, I saw blazing fire. Emea dared to look up at him and saw him looking intensely at her. You were being held down by a man, and even then, you didn't give up. You fought on, even when he tried to steal the purest thing you own. My jewels aren't the purest thing That's not what I'm talking about. You fought, Emea, Aide said, and stared into her eyes and her soul. You didn't know I was there. You thought you were all alone against those men, and you didn't give up. This is the same situation. Those men are holding you down, he said, and quickly glanced over her shoulder. Where's your fire? Emea felt something move inside her by his words. It was something fierce and empowering inside her heart that made it thud loud and strong. She looked into Aide's deep, hauntingly beautiful eyes and pressed her lips together. He was right. She needed to stop letting herself get pushed over and take charge. She needed to show them she was better than what they made of her. There it is, Aide said. A slow smirk spread on his lips. I see fire. I wanna keep practicing, Emea said and crawled to her feet. I'm not leaving this spot until I can at least make the dagger stick properly. Aide stood up as well. I'll stay and help if you want me to. Emea thought about it for a moment and made a decision. Aide smiled and then calmly nodded. I'll leave you to it then. Thanks, Emea smiled. She stepped up to the tree while Aide tied his cloak back on and pulled up the hood. When he turned to walk away, he paused and glanced back at her. He watched her for a short moment before he finally turned and left. Emea was going to train until she couldn't stand on her feet. When Emea woke up in her room the next morning, her body felt sore all over. Every part of her felt black and blue, and her arms were so sore she could barely lift them above her head. These symptoms were her proof that she was making progress. After Aide had left her to train yesterday, she had kept practicing until sundown. When she returned to the inn, Hank and the men were all sitting there, dining. Where were you? Dashiell had asked, concerned, when they had been wondering where she was. We were beginning to think your father's men had caught you and dragged you home. They won't get me that easily, Emea had laughed. She decided not to tell them she had been practicing her knife skills since she knew it would just lead to a heated discussion. A discussion she was way too exhausted to have. She had eaten her dinner and excused herself afterwards instead. She had slept like a rock. Emea now crawled out of her bed and went to the window of her room. They were staying at a small inn at the shore named the Oyster. It was right near the beach and was decorated with seashells and colorful glass. The view from her room was right across the shallow sea. The sun was already high in the sky, and the air felt warm. Emea stood there for a few moments, just enjoying life. It felt like she had everything she wanted right now. After another moment or two, she started washing her hair. Lately, she had been braiding it instead of tying it up into a bun, like most women did. There wasn't any need to impress, so why bother with anything else? She washed up, got dressed and packed, then joined the men down at breakfast. They were already wide awake and were discussing travel plans. We've decided to head for the western coast, Dashiell informed her. We've spread the word in all the big parts of the Eastern Kingdom, so now we'll start targeting the West. The people of Daelon are our main targets, Hank cut in. Since they lost the recent battle against Yi ex-fiancé, their lives have been significantly harder, he told and took a gulp of his mug. They'll want to join us, trust me. People with nothing to lose are the best candidates. We'll start the trip today, Dashiell continued after chewing down his bread. We cut across the southern lands by Lake Monaho. It'll be the fastest way. If we leave right after we've eaten and we stay out of trouble, we'll be there within 2 weeks. But Lake Monaho, that's close to Senwitos' capital. Emea frowned worriedly. Won't the roads be heavily guarded by the king's men? They will, Dashiell nodded grimly. So it will be dangerous. We'll have to stay alert at all times. We don't want to run into the king's men. By now he must have heard of us. Indeed he has, Hank scoffed. I overheard some men talking about it yesterday. They say he's mad. All the more reason to stay alert, Dashiell said. We should pack up and get going. We have a long journey ahead. It took them exactly 6 days to reach Lake Monaho. Emea kept practicing her knife skills every day whenever the men were getting trained by Hank. Aide had also begun teaching her the art of close combat with a knife. Arm up, blade down. Never let your opponent out of sight, Aide taught one late afternoon. The men were busy training by the campfire. You could hear Hank shouting instructions to men who were screwing up. Emea eyed up Aide, who was holding up his blade, too. They walked around in a slow circle, Emea imitating Aide's moves. Eyes on his upper body, Aide continued. You want to watch his hands and try to anticipate his next move. How do I do that? Watch his body language. The more you know about your opponent, the better chance you have of predicting his next move. Right, Emea watched Aide. He looked so perfect in way. His chiseled jawline was smudged with a little bit of dirt and his clothes looked worn out. Even so, he still looked perfect. All right, I think that's enough for one day, Aide finally said and eased up. He lowered his dagger and pushed it into his belt. You need to get some food and a good night's sleep. Long day tomorrow. Emea packed away her dagger too and watched while Aide put on his cloak again. Won't you join us for dinner? He glanced over his shoulder and gave her a smile. I'm sorry, I can't. I have some things to do. What things? Aide took his time securing his cloak around his neck before Emea realized he wasn't going to answer. She guessed this was yet another one of his secret things. I guess I'll see you tomorrow then, she finally sighed. She grabbed her satchel and slung it over her shoulder. Good night. Good night, Emea. Emea walked towards their camp while Aide disappeared into the woods. He headed in the direction of the lake. When Emea joined the campfire, the men were caught up talking about their practice earlier. Dashiell cheered when he saw her coming. You should have seen us earlier. Old Hank here nearly broke his back by trying to defeat me. I'm not old. Hank barked from across the fire. I just slipped in mud. I could kick ye arse any day. Keep telling yourself that, Dashiell chuckled and sipped his mug of soup. Whatever makes you sleep at night. So, what have you been up to, Emea got pulled out of her thoughts when Dash snapped his fingers in front of her eyes. Sorry, what? Anybody home? Dashiell questioned. "Are you okay? You seem a little distracted." She was. She couldn't stop thinking about what Aide was doing. He never told her what he was up to, and the curiosity was killing her. What was so secret and important that he had to do it every night? "I'm just tired," is all. Emea smiled. "I spent all day exploring the lake, searching for berries. Just regular stuff." "We lifted heavy swords all day long," Hank snorted. "If anyone should be tired, it should be us." "Yeah, well, I'm tired too," Emea said. "I think I'll just go to bed." "Are you sure?" Dashiell said and frowned. "The sun has barely set. You don't want to stay and talk. I feel like we don't see you enough. You're a part of the group too, you know." Emea felt a little guilty for a short moment. She had been skipping out on them a lot lately. The truth was, she was tired, but not from walking around. It was from training all day. Whenever they were on the road, she could barely hold onto the reins of the carriage. She was exhausted, but despite her aching arms, she stuck it out, because at the same time, she had never felt stronger in her whole life, and it was an amazing feeling. But right now, it wasn't because she was tired or didn't want their company. Emea just had something she needed to do. "I know I am," she smiled apologetically to Dash, who was looking at her. "But I'm too tired today. Tomorrow I promise I'll stay and chat. Good night." She headed back to her tent, but instead of crawling into it, she paused. She glanced back at the men who had resumed their talk about their training. When she was certain that nobody was looking, she snugged behind her tent and continued into the woods, down towards the lake. She couldn't resist it. She just had to know what Aide was doing. His secrecy was unbearable, and it was driving her crazy, so she followed the trail Aide had taken and hoped it would lead her to him. The light was slowly fading, and soon all she could see were dark shadows. The sun's last rays of light disappeared behind the trees and left the forest dark and full of weird shapes. After a moment or two of walking, she saw a clearing ahead. A figure was standing by the lake. His feet were dipped in the lakefront, and he was holding something in his hand. Long silver hair fell down his shirtless back, and Emea now realized what he was doing. The item in his hand turned out to be cloth. He was bathing. Emea felt a blush creep up her neck when she realized what she had walked in on. Aide ran the cloth over his arm and squeezed the water out. Even in the darkness, Emea could see how the water ran down his body and dripped off the tips of his hair. It was hypnotizing to watch. Emea bit down on her lower lip. A new sensation formed in her stomach. It was something rebellious, yet toxic. Watching Aide shirtless and damped from the water made her heart beat louder. She felt her body getting hotter and her stomach tingled. What was this? If it was what she thought it was. "Emea, if you're going to peep, at least try and be discreet." Aide didn't even turn around. He just spoke calmly, as if he wasn't surprised. Emea, on the other hand, was very surprised, not to mention embarrassed. She shyly stepped out behind the tree she was lurking behind and was thankful that it was too dark to tell that she was blushing. "I am so sorry." "For what, being curious?" Aide spoke over his shoulder. A smile formed on his lips. "It's understandable." "I thought you were doing something secret," Emea mumbled while she walked a little closer. I don't know what I was doing. I guess I was trying to find out more about me. Aide suggested and finally turned around. You really are curious. Emea's eyes dropped to his naked chest and had to swallow a lump. His torso was chiseled to the point where it should be illegal. His pale, smooth skin was covered in white, whimsical tattoos that didn't look like anything she had ever seen before. That, along with how gorgeously sexy he looked, made her blatantly stare at him. Emea. Huh. She quickly looked up at his face and blushed again. She had been way too obvious. Aide didn't seem to care. You shouldn't be out alone. You know these woods are dangerous. Emea cleared her head of all the naughty images forming in her mind and focused on him. You're out here alone. You know that's different. You're still learning to defend yourself, Aide said and stepped out of the water. He started walking up to the shore near a tree. You're not carrying any light and you're unarmed. It's reckless. Emea hated to admit it, but he had a point as always. That didn't change how she felt, however. Aide, I want to ask you something. You always do. He sighed and picked up his tunic that was lying on a tree stump. He begun pulling it on, hiding away his tattoos, the ones Emea wanted to ask him about. I know you probably won't answer, but I was wondering. Get down. One moment she was standing on her feet, the next Aide had throttled her to the ground. Not a second later, a dagger shot straight through the air where she had been standing and pierced through a tree behind them. What the H? Emea didn't get to finish her sentence before an arrow shot through the air as well, aiming for Aide, who shot to his feet. Emea couldn't keep up, but it seemed that Aide could. The arrow heading for his heart, he kicked out of the way by jumping up and making a roundhouse kick. Emea stared with her mouth open. That was unbelievable. The next second, 4 men came from out of nowhere, and they were armed to the teeth. In their coats of mail and their helmets, they were unmistakably the king's guards. They had found them. Aide, Emea shouted when he walked up to them. Evening, gentlemen, Aide coldly greeted. It's a northern elf, one of the guards timidly said. Look at his ears. They're extinct. Another one exclaimed and took a step forward. What does this mean? Aide's voice was like thunder, basically. Run. What happened next, Emea couldn't believe. The men, all as a unit, charged for Aide, who with no weapon whatsoever happily charged for them, too. Emea had never been more scared in her life as the men drew their swords and launched for him. Aide was a skilled fighter, but could he fight 4 armed men with his bare hands? Aide seemed to think he could. But to Emea's complete and utter mortification, he really could. It was like watching a well-choreographed dance. One of the men swung their sword, Aide bowed. Another man took a stab, Aide moved to the side. A guard tried to trip him, he jumped. He was getting attacked from 4 angles, but Aide didn't lose perspective. He managed to grab a dagger from one of the guards' belt and used it to slice through the sleeve of the owner's armor. Blood splashed from the wound and made the warrior drop his sword. Then Aide continued to the next. Emea watched from the foot of a tree, balled up in fear like she always did. Her brain was panicking, even if it looked like Aide was winning. Aide knocked one of the remaining 3 guards in his stomach with his knee and made him stumble backwards and fall down. Aide took that opportunity to throw the dagger at his heart. The guard fell limp on the ground, dead. 2 men were left standing. The guy Aide had cut in the arm was climbing to his feet, but instead of heading towards Aide, he glanced at Amaya. A grim smile stretched on his face. Amaya started to crawl away. Her back collided with a tree, and suddenly she was trapped. She was too scared to move when the guard came up to her. "You only see red hair like that one place in the whole kingdom," the guard hissed. "MS Roch. Stay away from me or I'll. She had nothing. No weapon, no protection." "Or what?" The guard mused and flashed her a dark grin. "Daddy isn't here to save you anymore. You ran away. Welcome to the real world, Toots." Amaya did the only thing she could think of. She looked up at the tree trunk above her and saw the dagger the men had thrown at them lodged within it. Without thinking, she reached for it and yanked it out. She pointed it at the guard. "I said, stay away." The guard let out a bark of a laugh. Behind him, Amaya could see Aide was still busy with the 2 other men. He looked to be almost done with one more, but he was still fighting. She would have to do this herself. "Are you trying to threaten me?" The guard chuckled. "That only works when a person gets scared." He leaned in so close Amaya could smell his bad breath. "I don't get scared." The next moment, the knife got yanked out of her hand and thrown away. Amaya screamed as the guard grabbed her by her throat, lifted her up. Her airways closed, and she choked on her breath. "Good girl, shutting up like you're supposed to." The guard smiled, pleased. "I see you haven't completely lost your manners." The guard yanked her off the tree and whirled her around and into his body. He kept his hand firmly locked around her neck as he turned to face Aide. "Yo, elf." Aide, who had acquired another dagger, stabbed the last guard in his stomach, who then fell to the ground, dead. He then shifted his gaze to the man holding Amaya and saw her locked in his grip. His eyes turned into ice. "This is how it's going to go down," the guard said and squeezed around Amaya's neck. She wheezed. "You're going to drop the knife and then walk out into the lake," he said, a wicked smile on his lips. "Then me and the gal will take a long walk into the woods and have some fun. If I as much as see your shadow, I won't hesitate to kill her and then kill you. Are we clear?" Aide's upper lip curled back in rage. "Look around you. Your friends are dead. Are you sure you want to be threatening me?" "I don't think you understand," the guard chuckled. "If you take one step closer, the girl's neck gets it. And it would be such a shame to break such a pretty little thing," he darkly chuckled. Suddenly, Amaya felt his big paw crawl up her waist, up to her breast. He squeezed it tightly and made Amaya jerk in his arms. Bile and disgust rose in her throat. "Let her go," Aide roared. Amaya felt her blood run cold by the aggressiveness in his voice. She couldn't tell in the dim light, but she swore she saw something glint sharply around his mouth. It almost looked like F. "I don't think so," the guard mused. "Now start walking into the lake. Me and MS Roch have some things to do. I have to get back to the castle soon. I'm sure King Ragnar will be very interested to know that a northern elf is walking about in his kingdom. Too bad you won't be alive to tell him the tale," Aide growled. The next second, the dagger in his hand was flying through the air and stabbed the guard through his shoulder. The guard screamed bloody murder and, without thinking, let his grip ease around Amaya's neck. That was all she needed to get away. Amaya jerked out of his grip and fell to the ground. She crawled away from him in fear that he might catch her again, but in the next second, Aide was at his throat. Aide grabbed the guard and hurled him around. He violently throttled him into the forest ground, only to pull him right back up. He punched his fist into his jaw, and what followed was a nasty sound of bone breaking. The guard hollered in pain. Aide kept pounding the guard into the ground, only to drag him to his feet again and pound him back down. At last, the guard seemed to finally lose his strength. Not that he had stood a chance against Aide anyway. A piece of advice, Aide growled into his face, holding him by his collar. Don't ever threaten a woman around me. I have a habit of beating up the ones who do. Amaya couldn't take it anymore. She found the discarded dagger on the ground, and before she realized what she was doing, she threw. The dagger cut straight through the guard's armor and pierced his chest. She hit him and it stayed there. Aide froze in shock for a second, not actually believing what just happened, until the guard made a garbled sound. He glanced back at Amaya, who too had frozen solid. Then Aide turned back to the guard, pulled the knife from the guard's chest, and sliced his throat in one fluid motion. The guard fell dead to the ground with a thump. Amaya didn't realize she had fallen onto her knees before she felt the ground under her hands. Her whole body started shaking with the realization of what she had just done. Amaya, Aide was there, crouching in front of her when she started hyperventilating. It's over now. Calm down. But it wasn't over. Not for Amaya. The whole scene kept replaying in her head over and over again. The look on the guard's face when the knife had penetrated his heart, the look on Aide's face when he had glanced back at her in shock. She had just killed a man. Aide, I K-killed. Amaya, look at me. Aide stopped her and placed his hands on her shoulders. His eyes were steel. You did not kill him. I did. You were just helping. You didn't do anything wrong. Amaya fought to keep back the tears pressing. Aide, I hit him in the H-heart. You hit him, but I killed him, Aide persisted. He could have recovered from that wound. Okay, I killed him. Aide was just trying to make her feel better by taking the blame for murdering a man. But Amaya knew what she had done. The blade had pierced through his armor and penetrated his heart. The blood pooling out from his chest was the proof of that. Amaya felt a wetness on her cheek and knew she had submitted to the tears. Her whole body was shaking, but oddly enough she felt empty inside, like there was no shred of life left in her. Amaya, Aide whispered. He carefully lifted her chin when she looked down. You are not a murderer. Her eyes met with his. His crystal orbs weren't wavering from hers. They looked strongly into hers until she felt like she couldn't breathe. When she couldn't take it any longer, she looked down again, then noticed a weird substance staining Aide's sleeve. Aide, your arm, she whispered and frowned a little. Aide quickly hid it. Don't worry about that. That's when Amaya realized. Aide, you're hurt. It's nothing, he dismissed. Let's focus on you, Amaya. But your arm is bleeding. Let it. Amaya didn't let him get away with it. She grabbed his arm and brought it under her gaze. Aide made a sharp hiss. Careful. She quickly glanced up at him and then carefully pulled up his sleeve to inspect the wound. She saw a long cut run up his arm to the pit of his elbow, but the thing that had caught her eye was his blood. It was purple. Your blood, she exclaimed, her eyes widening. Why is it purple? Aide sighed resignedly and looked at his wound. All elves have purple blood. It's a trademark we get from dragons. So it's true, Emea gasped. You are related to dragons. In a way, yes, Aide replied and pulled his arm to himself. But we don't share anything else than blood. Listen, we need to head back to camp, he said, changing the subject abruptly. The king's men must have passed by the group. We have to check if they're okay. She sighed. You're right. She knew he didn't want to discuss that subject any further, and trying wouldn't get her anywhere. There was something he didn't want her to know. Why else would he try and hide his wound? We should head back. Your arm needs treating. My arm is fine, Aide curtly replied. Let's go. They walked back together, Aide being their guide. He knew the way back much better. After a minute or two, they came to the camp and found the men still chatting lively by the fire. They didn't seem to have noticed anything was wrong, but once Dashiell spotted them, his eyes widened. What the hell happened to you two? He exclaimed and shot to his feet. The men behind him quickly followed his gaze and widened their eyes in shock, too. Hank immediately frowned and stood up, hand on his sword. We got attacked by the king's guards, Aide told. They were hiding in the woods. They've been waiting for us ever since we entered the area. How the hell do ye know that? Hank barked. My ears aren't just for show, Aide calmly replied. Elves hear about 10 times better than humans. That explained a lot of things, Emea thought. For example, it explained why he knew she was there watching him just before and how he knew where there was trouble. He could hear everything happening. That's bloody nice of ye to share, Hank sarcastically snorted. Anything else we should know? Not right now, but I do think we should pack up and get going, Aide suggested. We managed to kill the ones that attacked us, but they can't be the only ones out here. Dashiell broke in and frowned at Aide. What do you mean by we? Aide glanced down at Emea. She could read his eyes, and she knew what he was asking her. Did she want to reveal her secret or not? She looked back at the men. While you men have been training with Hank, I've been taking lessons from Aide in how to fight and throw with daggers. Both Hank and Dashiell's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. Some of the other men looked just as surprised. There was a moment of silence, then Hank turned to Aide and exploded. Ye have been teaching her how to fight. Are ye crazy? Do ye want her to be on the battlefield when all this goes down? Why don't we just ask kids to join us as well? That'll be a great idea, too. Are you comparing women with children? Aide calmly asked and raised a brow. Think very carefully before you answer. Hank turned as purple as Aide's blood. I'll bloody think carefully when I want to. You are risking the life of a woman. I am improving her chance of surviving, Aide snapped. He looked to be finally getting annoyed. If the king's men came knocking on your wife's door, would you rather have her defenseless, or would you like her to know how to handle a weapon? Are ye threatening my wife? Enough, Emea shouted and stepped between the men. There is real danger in these woods, and if tonight has taught me anything, it's that I feel safer knowing how to defend myself. If anyone has a problem with me learning how to do that, you can take it up with my dagger, she growled. I'm tired of getting looked down upon. We are fighting for equality, guys. How can we proclaim that we want fairness for all mankind if we don't believe in it ourselves? She looked around at all the men and especially at Hank. I killed a man tonight. Please tell me it wasn't in vain. Emea, you didn't kill. Aide cut in and placed a hand on her shoulder. Stop telling yourself that. What the hell is wrong with your arm? Dashiell spoke up after seeing the purple stain on his tunic. Is that purple blood? Aide clenched his jaw. It's just a minor cut. All elves have purple blood. It's no big deal. Wicked, Dashiell mumbled, but then glanced at Emea. Are you unharmed? She nodded quietly. I'm fine. Aide protected me as always. All right, listen, Hank suddenly said. He seemed to have done some thinking. I'm not saying I approve of ye teaching the gal how to fight. But he said when Emea was about to open her mouth, if that's what she wants, so be it. I already said weeks ago that I cleaned my hands in this. He bickered and scowled at her. If ye get harmed, I'm not responsible. And I'm fine with that, Emea added and firmly crossed her arms. As long as she got to continue her training, she could care less about what Hank or the others thought. Good, Hank said and hiked up in his pants. Then let's pack up the camp. And you, elf boy, he said and pointed a finger at Aide. Ye walk in the front. If ye hear even as much as a twig snap, I want ye to alarm us. I have no intentions of dying tonight. Fine, Aide replied. He still seemed a little tense. Him and Hank clearly had different views on the world, and Hank's narrow-mindedness was pushing Aide's limits. Let's move it, then, Hank shouted. I want to be out of these woods within the week. Dash, for the 100th time, I'm fine. I don't need you to sit with me. You were attacked, Em. I just want to help you a little. Emea rolled her eyes and yanked the reins out of Dashiell's hands when he tried to grab them. I can steer myself. I can take over for a little while. You could lie down in the back and rest. It had been this way ever since they had left the camp at Lake Monaho. Dash was convinced that Emea suffered from shock and needed to be treated with kit gloves, but in truth, she was fine. After sleeping on it, she had come to terms with the fact that she would have to get used to killing. For what they were fighting for, some lives would be lost, even if they hoped they could do this the non-violent way. Stop fuzzing around me, Emea snapped flatly. That is the last time I'm telling you. If you try one more time, you get to walk behind the wagon. Got it? Dash sheepishly smiled. Okay, I'll stop. I'm just worried about you. There's no need to be, Emea assured him. I'm not scared, at least not anymore. I was in the moment, but that was only because that brute tried to touch me. Again, Dashiell exclaimed, horrified. Didn't you mention something along the same lines, back in Bart? Yes, I did. Man, they flock around you like flies, Dashiell mumbled. Do you think it's your hair? My hair. Emea questioned and looked down at her braid. What's with my hair? It's so red, Dashiell said and admired her hair. It shines in sunlight, it glows in moonlight. He cut himself off. A pink blush made its way up to his cheeks. Wow, that sounded cheesy. I'm sorry. Emea chuckled and shook her head. It's all right. Could be your dresses, too, Dashiell awkwardly murmured. A dress stands out pretty harshly among breeches. That's actually not a half-bad idea, Emea exclaimed when an idea popped into her head. Idea? What idea? I didn't mention an idea, did I? Dashiell looked confused. Breeches, Emea grinned. I'll buy some breeches. What? Dashiell blinked. How did we land there? I'm tired of leafs always sticking to the hem of dresses, Emea told truthfully. They're unsuitable for staying in the woods, and I hate whenever a branch gets caught. I'll invest in a pair of breeches. Dashiell was quiet for a moment. Is this the part where I mention you're a little crazy? Is this the part where I mention I don't care? She was buying some breeches. Why the idea hadn't occurred to her sooner was a mystery. Dresses were unfit for the forest. She needed something that was easier to movie around in, something tighter and less fluffy. Who cared if women wearing breeches were frowned upon? She wrote a mental note to remember to buy a pair when they stopped in the next town. She was doing this. Emea rolled around on the leafy forest ground, laughing uncontrollably. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this free. She was wearing breeches, and they were so comfortable, she swore she would never wear another dress. Breeches were much better. You look happy, a voice said from above her. Emea glanced up and saw Aide standing over her, smiling down. Even from this point of view, he looked handsome. Emea was beginning to think he didn't have a bad angle. She smiled brightly up at him. I am. Can you see a difference? You're wearing breeches, Aide noted and grinned. Looks good. For some reason, Emea felt a slight tingle in her stomach. She wasn't as used to getting compliments as one might think, especially from men. Thanks, she gently smiled. What are you doing here? Are you about to do some secret stuff? Can I watch? Aide let out a bark of laughter and showed off a set of perfect white teeth. No, I'm not doing anything secret. Actually, I was looking for you. Dashiell said I could find you tumbling around in the leaves over here. Emea blushed a little, but then hesitantly stood up. Right, I was just, testing out my new breeches. Of course, Aide smiled and made a respectable bow with his head. But I've been thinking about something ever since we left the lake. Oh, Emea felt a nervous pinch in her stomach. She hoped this wasn't about the man she had killed. It occurred to me that you have no idea how to defend yourself without a weapon, Aide voiced with concern. I've been teaching you how to fight with a dagger, but you have no idea how to fight someone if you're unarmed. That was true. Emea had felt defenseless against the brute in the alley and the guard from a few nights back. So what are you saying? Are you going to teach me how to defend myself without a weapon, too? Aide paused for a moment. Only if you want me to. I can't help but notice you have a natural gift when it comes to attracting danger. Thanks, Imea frowned. She was pretty sure that wasn't a compliment, though. I'd like to learn. Can you teach me? Aide smiled a little. I certainly can. Great. When do we start? Right now, Aide said and rose a brow. If you want to. Imea nodded firmly. I do. Let's begin. Aide nodded a single time before he stepped up behind her. Do you remember this? He suddenly grabbed her by her neck. He held it in a tight grip that brought back bad memories. Imea gulped down a lump of fear as she remembered how the brute had held her that night in the alley. How could she ever forget? I remember. That's called a cuff hold, Aide said, and let go again. It gets its name from the way thugs use it to shackle their victims to the ground. It's also the most popular grip amongst rapists, he added with a bitter mien. He then took a few steps backwards and begun circling her. Now, when the attacker uses this grip, his ultimate intention is to bring you onto the ground, preferably face down first. Why? She cut in and frowned. I would have thought a man preferred a woman from the front. Isn't that how it works? Aide simply smiled at her for a moment. Imea would have given gold and diamonds to know what he was thinking. He looked at her with that look in his eyes. She couldn't decipher it. Aide finally wiped smile off and got serious again. Some men do, but thugs have found it easier to wrestle a woman to the ground when she is defenseless. Aide explained and crossed his arms. When you're face down, you can't reach up and hit him. I see. Imea nodded thoughtfully so. How do you fight it? The grip. Aide took a few more steps, clearly considering something, but then stopped abruptly. Well, the technique you need to learn to get out of the grip is best taught when showed. The only thing is... When he paused for too long, Imea cut in. Well... Aide sighed again before looking at her. It's very intimate. In order for me to show you, I'd have to go a little physical on you. Okay, Imea said and made a confused frown. That seems all right. We would have to simulate the attack slowly, as if I was attacking you, Aide continued with a controlled voice. I'd have to pretend to be a rapist. Though now she understood. He was uncomfortable playing a role he despised more than anything, and on top of that, he would have to grab her in ways that might seem inappropriate. I understand if you don't want to do it. Imea, I'm not concerned about myself. Aide cut in. You experienced something very traumatic, and I don't want to teach you this if it's going to bring back memories that are too painful. Imea frowned and looked at how protective he was acting. He was always protective, but somehow this seemed different. Aide, she started and took a few steps forward. I know what happened was terrible, but the truth is, you stopped it before it actually happened. I know I did, but... You don't have to be afraid of scaring me, Imea said and looked into his crystal eyes. This will be different. I know you won't be trying to rape me, but trying to teach me. Aide pressed his lips together and studied her face for a while. His eyes still read concern, but she knew he was going to agree. Fine, he said and sighed. The decision is up to you. Imea smiled and nodded. Then let's get started. All right, Aide sighed for the last time and warmed up his arms with a quick stretch. We'll start off by you facing away from me. I'll come up behind you and wrap my arms around your neck and waist. We'll do this slowly so I can guide you through the attack. Got it. Got it, Emea confirmed and turned her back on him. Go for it. He stepped up behind her, and suddenly she could feel his warmth radiating into her back. I whirl my arm around your waist like this. She saw his arm curl around her stomach, as well as her arms, and then he gently pressed her body towards his, to keep you from escaping and lock in your arms. If the attacker is strong, you're already defenseless by now, he said close to her ear. Emea swallowed as she felt his soft breath caress the shell of her ear. Her body was pressed right up against his torso, and she could feel every contour of his rock-like figure. It was practically a backwards embrace. Oh, okay, I'm with you so far. Good, he murmured and slowly rose his other hand to her neck. Now I bring my other hand around your throat. He softly placed his hand around her slender neck, so carefully she barely felt his touch. The attacker will squeezes tight enough to cut off most of your air supply, thus diminishing your ability to cry for help. He gently pressed his hand a little tighter around her throat, but nowhere near enough to even make her cough. Emea felt very self-conscious about everything her body normally did. Breathe, swallow, even blinking. His hand was resting on top of her pulse, and she didn't doubt he could feel it racing. By now your attacker will already have the advantage. You could try and wrestle his hold, but it will only cause him to hold that much tighter. Aide instructed her, his voice as steady as himself. As unorthodox as it sounds, the best thing you can do is wait until he gets you on the ground. Okay, Emea said and swallowed again. She could feel whatever nervousness she was swallowing passed by his hand before it inevitably landed in her stomach where his arm rested. He had to be sensing her mood. If he was hiding it, or maybe just ignoring it. Now, if this attack was real, I would spin my foot around yours and make you trip while at the same time hold you by your neck until you land on the ground face down. He continued, while softly letting go of her throat. But for the sake of this, I think it's best if I just ask you to lie down for me. All right, that's fine, Emea nervously replied as Aide unwrapped himself from her. She suddenly felt cold. Emea carefully bowed down and placed herself on the leafy forest ground, palms down and chest against the dirt. It was a very awkward position since she couldn't really see him anymore. Like this. Yes, now this is the part I'm not particularly fond of, Aide said and bent down to his knees. I'm going to have to lie on top of you. You can tell me to stop at any time, he assured her. This can be very boundary breaking, and I don't want you to do anything you're uncomfortable with. I think I'll manage, Emea replied and gave him a quick smile. If it'll help me survive an ambush, I don't see any problems. All right, Aide said and exhaled. He then carefully placed a knee on either side of her body. So the attacker starts off by mounting his victim like this, he told while placing himself accordingly. They use one hand to balance themselves. He leaned in over her body and balanced his weight on one strong hand on the ground next to her head, and used their other hand to grab you with the cuff hold. Emea cut in when the whole scene started to look and feel familiar. He uses it to hold me down. Exactly. Aide carefully placed his other hand around her neck. Despite their clever talk, they're all about the same thing. They disgust me. Emea growled and involuntarily clenched her fists. I'd think you a simpleton if they didn't, Aide replied with a humorless voice. Now remember, we're just rehearsing, so try and relax, okay? Right, relax. Emea mumbled and slowly unfolded her fists. So now I'm on the ground. You said to wait until I was on the ground. What do I have to do? Right, you start off by waiting for him to get close enough, Aide said and leaned into her ear like this. Trust me, if he is anything like a classic rapist, he'll lean in to throw a few nasty words in your face. And if he doesn't, you'll still be able to do this, Aide said. But trust me when I say he will. It's the last satisfaction he gets before he gets lost in the adrenaline rush. I've seen enough rapists to know that they all have the same moves. All right, Emea nervously replied. She wondered exactly how many people he had saved from getting raped. So what was the move? The attacker has now leaned in to give you a piece of his deluded mind. But what he doesn't realize is that in that moment, he forgets all about his facade. He thinks you're so caught in the fright of listening to his words that you forget all about trying to escape. So this is your moment, Aide said and adjusted himself. While he talks, you take your hand and grab his, the one he's leaning on, and dig your nails into his skin so hard he loses focus. Right, Emea determinately said, and used her hand to wrap it around Aide's wrist. She squeezed around it and held on tight. Good, Aide said and placed his knees better on the ground. The attacker gets caught off guard and of course tries to get you to let go of him. He needs that hand to reach for your garbs. So while he's distracted by getting his other hand free, he loses focus on the one that's holding you down. Aide explained and loosened his grip on her neck. He will have loosened it enough for you to thrust your head backwards into his and give his forehead a nice bump. All right, what then? Emea asked with a smirk. Do I like? Rip his arm or something? Aide chuckled softly and shook his head. Not quite. Once you've knocked his head, he'll automatically retract a little, giving you the opportunity to stick your elbow into his ribs. Aide took her hand and softly guided her arm into his chest so that her elbow softly touched his ribcage. You have to hit him as hard as you can so this next bit will get easier. And what is that? You have to use your whole body to roll him over, Aide said and let go of her arm. Use his disorientation to your advantage. Support your arm on the ground, set off hard, and then roll over. This causes you to flip him over and land on top of him. Do you understand? I think so. Yes, Emea said and nodded against the ground. Good. Now you try it, Aide said and placed his hand back on the ground. Try and roll you over, Emea asked hesitantly and felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Yes, try and roll me over, Aide chuckled. You won't hurt me. Should I use strength? She carefully asked. If you prefer, yes, Aide said. A lock of his silver hair slid down from his shoulder and tickled her ear. It would certainly help you learn better. Emea nodded again and swallowed before shortly replying, All right, then. Whenever you're ready, Aide smiled and braced himself. Emea took a deep breath and readied herself for her attack. She had to focus so she wouldn't do anything wrong and accidentally hurt him, despite what he said. Silently, she counted to 3 and then did as he'd said. She started by grabbing his arm and dug her nails into his skin, hard. Aide released her neck, and she took the opportunity to knock his head with her own. The blow probably hurt her own head more than his, but Aide did as he had told and retracted. Emea released his hand and jammed her elbow into his rib. Aide didn't even as much as flinch as she set off on the ground with her hand and tilted them both over. Aide let himself fall onto the ground, and Emea landed, as predicted, on top of him. Good job. Aide smiled and supported himself up on his elbows. It was great for a first time. I think I hurt my head. Emea mumbled and grimaced when she rubbed the back of her sore head. She heard Aide chuckle beneath her. I think you punctured my skin. What? Aide held up his hand and revealed how his wrist had 5 small puncture wounds, all of them bleeding ever so slightly. Small drops of purple blood ran down his pale skin. Oh my, Aide, I'm so sorry. Emea started and gasped from the sight. You should have said something, I would have stopped. Relax, Emea. It's just a little blood, Aide chuckled again. Besides, you did good. If it had been a real rapist, he would have gotten some serious damage. But Aide. The attack isn't over, Aide interrupted her. Need I remind you he's still conscious and very angry? Emea said when she realized they were still rehearsing. So, what's next? You need to make sure he won't be able to run after you, Aide said and laid back down on the ground. Depending on how fast you and your attacker both are, you can simply hurry up and off him, but if he's quick, he'll grab your arms like this. He took both of her wrists and held them tightly in his hands. If and when that happens, just twist your arms so that he's forced to let go. Like this, Emea said and twisted her arms around until Aide had to let go or he'd dislocate his hands. Precisely like that, Aide smiled and rested his hands on the ground again. But if he doesn't and is still slightly disoriented, knock his head with your elbow and break his nose. This will make his eyes water and give you an opportunity to get away. Brilliant, Emea grinned. So I have to break your nose now. I'd prefer if you didn't. Aide chuckled and popped himself up on his elbows again. But you certainly can if you feel the need. Emea was seriously tempted for a short moment, but of course didn't do it. I'm good, thanks. Oh, sorry. Emea gasped and quickly shot to her feet. She turned around quick enough to see Aide climb to his feet as well. It's no problem, Aide calmly said and brushed off any leaves on his tunic that had stuck to it. Now you've got the basic need-to-know on how to escape rapists. Basic, Emea said confused. I thought that was it. Is there more? Well, that was only one possible scenario. Aide explained and looked at her. I only showed you the most frequently used assault technique. Your assailant could attack you from the front as well. He could have a concealed weapon. He could be chasing you. Then why shouldn't we rehearse those as well? Emea asked and crossed her arms. I don't want to just be prepared for one possible attack. I want to be able to take complete care of myself. Believe me, I do too. but I think we should take these things in moderation. You need to learn one act before we start another. Well, I already memorized this one. What's the harm in teaching me one more? One at a time, Emea, Aide said and ran a quick hand over his smooth hair to get a small twig out. I don't want to overwhelm you with these maneuvers. Just show me one more. Emea begged and eagerly folded her hands. Please, Aide, I don't want to be helpless ever again. Aide turned and gave her a soul-searching look. He studied her determined eyes and then looked at the ground with a sigh. I guess I can't talk you out of it. Is that a yes? She tried hopefully and waited with anticipation while Aide rubbed his face. It's a yes. Yes, Emea shouted and threw a fist in the air, doomed to all rapists. Aide let out a short bark of laughter. You surprise me sometimes, Emea, you really do. I keep thinking that you'll think you're getting in over your head, but you never do. You fight on. I've been doing nothing my whole life. It's time I actually do something, Emea fiercely said and stretched her fingers. Now show me the moves, elf boy. Aide rolled his eyes and then looked up at the sky. That nickname is catching on. Get used to it. All right then, Firefly, get over here and stand in front of me. Firefly, Emea repeated with a doubtful look. Is that supposed to be some sort of metaphor for having red hair? Firefly is what my people would call someone like you, Aide told with a smile. Someone with fire in their soul and wings to fly. Right. Emea hummed and placed herself in front of him so they were less than a meter apart. So teach me how to fly, elf boy. Start off by placing your feet in shoulder width distance. Okay, like this. Exactly. The human body goes into a defensive stand whenever it feels threatened. It's a natural human instinct. Oh, yeah. Emea smirked and looked into Aide's eyes. And how would an elf know about human instincts? You don't want me to go down that path, believe me, Aide bitterly replied. Actually, I do, Emea said, feeling a sudden curiosity as to why he got so serious. But Aide just smiled it off. This next move is important, so pay attention. Emea had learned that that was how he reacted whenever he wouldn't answer the subject. He just smiled, and there was nothing she could do to push the truth out of him. So with a sigh, she nodded and looked at his figure again. Fine, I'm looking. When the attacker attacks from the front, the first thing he likes to do is make sure you can't fight back. He'll start off by grabbing your arms like so. Aide used both his hands to grab each of her lower arms. They'll either grab your lower arms or your wrists. Either way, they're both effective. Okay, I'm with you so far, Emea said, and nodded concentrated. Do I wait to get on the ground this time, too, before I act, or can I do something now? Aide smiled playfully and looked into her eyes. The firefly is feisty, I see. Well, as a matter of fact, you have two options, Aide instructed while still holding her arms. Option 1, while he's trying to control your arms, bust your knee in between his legs. That'll teach him a lesson. For a man, you really hate men, Emea laughed. Well, as a man, I personally know how much it hurts, Aide chuckled back. But no, I don't hate all men. Just the ones who make a living out of using innocent women for pleasure toys. Fair enough, Emea nodded. So what's option 2? Option 2. Wait for the guy to try and pin you beneath him. You use that moment to surprise him and pin him beneath you instead. Shouldn't I just be trying to get away from the prick as fast as possible? Emea asked and raised a brow. Aide chuckled and bobbed his head. Well, I suppose you would. I guess I would just want to teach the guy a really valuable life lesson before letting him run off to find his next victim. So punch the guy sore and then make a run for it. Emea squinted her eyes for a second while she thought. You know what? I like that idea better, too. In that case, let's move on with option 2, Aide said and rearranged his hands to her wrists. So first off, he'll try and shove you to the ground, using the foot-tripping technique again, in which case, you'll trip and land hard on your back, followed by the weight of your attacker landing on top of you. He explained and looked down at her. If you're up for it, we can try it. Of course I won't be landing on you, I'll stop my fall with my hands, he assured her. It sounds fun. Let's try. Emea smiled and readied herself for the assault. You are surprisingly cheerful when rehearsing rape attacks, Aide said and raised a questionable brow. Should I be worried? Hey, I'm just trying to make teaching fun here, Emea cheekily replied and childishly stuck out her tongue. Aide laughed and shook his head at her. Again, you surprise me. Well, there's a lot more surprises where yep. Aide tackled her to the ground, using the tripping technique, and suddenly they were both falling in a whirl of limbs. Emea herself landed on the leafy ground with a thump, while Aide very acrobatically managed to break his fall by releasing her wrists and placing his hands on either side of her shoulders on the ground. When Emea figured out what was up and what was down, she found Aide chuckling smugly above her. Hey, she snapped and scowled up at him. I wasn't ready. A surprise. He winked and flashed her a smirk. Emea grunted and stuck out her chin. Real cute, elf boy, real cute. All right now, let's get serious, Aide said and wiped off his smile. This next one is your move. Can I hit you in your genitals? That's a no. Now when the attacker has wrestled you to the ground, he thinks he has the advantage, but what he doesn't realize is that the advantage lies with you. Sure. What advantage? Emea flatly asked, still feeling a little grumpy from his little trick. Being on top is always the most demanding position. You either have to balance on your hands or balance on your knees. Either way is very exhausting, even for the strongest man. Let me guess. You know this because you like being on top, Emea smugly suggested. Focus, Emea, Aide ordered her, though a dirty little smirk played on his lips. I knew I should have stayed on one lesson per day. No, I'm focused. Emea snapped and squinted her eyes concentratedly. Super focused. Aide sighed at her, but then shook his head. Fine. Depending on what your attacker is resting on, you need to use your legs or your head. Aide continued. Legs or head, Emea repeated, determined. If he's resting on his hands, you use your legs. If he's resting his legs, use your head. It's really all about using the opposite of what he has to work with, he told while still holding his weight off her. Emea had to admit it was very intimate, lying like this. He was an attractive man, even though he was so private. It felt like this was the closest she would get to him, and a part of her enjoyed it while another part craved more. So if he's resting on his legs, you have to take your hands before he does. Aide told and rested each knee on either side of her body. Reach up and grab his head around his ears. Use his ears as handles. Pull his head towards you and dunk your head hard against his. How come a lot of your techniques involves the same things? Emea asked curiously. Human women aren't usually that physically strong, so I'm teaching you how to do maximal damage with the natural weapons you already have, Aide explained and smiled. A woman's strength lies in her head, quite literally. Well, you're welcome. Back to defense, Aide smiled back and looked at her. Once you've knocked him over the head, he'll automatically retract his hands to hold his sore forehead. Natural human instinct, Emea asked and raised a playful brow. Whose head was hurting just before? Aide smirked and raised a brow back at her. Emea immediately frowned. All right, Taché. Now will you focus? Aide said seriously. We're almost done, but we'll never get there in this pace. All right, Emea hissed and sighed. Good, now I want you to listen carefully. While he's holding his head, push yourself backwards, using your hands to slide out from under him. Aide instructed. He'll realize what's happening by the time you're almost out. This is where you thrust your foot into his pelvis and knock the air out of him. He smirked. He won't be able to do anything while you take your run for it. Great, Emea nodded. So what's next? Next, you try it on me. Aide smiled and adjusted himself on his knees. Give me your worst. I have to. Grab your ears, knock your head, and kick you in the stomach. Emea asked, feeling unsure of how much she would actually hurt him. After all, he wasn't wearing his armor, only his thin breeches and his tunic. Emea, I've been in more fights than I care to remember, Aide said and looked pointedly at her. Trust me when I say, this is the least amount of pain I will endure. I'm not sure if I should be happy about that, or be insulted that you just called me weak. Emea mumbled and frowned again. Use whatever you have to get through the attack, Aide chuckled, but just remember to stay focused. All right, Emea said and narrowed her eyes in concentration. Here we go. She reached up and grabbed his slender elf ears and pulled his head towards her as hard as she could. She noticed a brief smile on his lips just before she dunked her head into his as powerful as she possibly could. The knock made her own forehead hurt, but she ignored it as Aide reached for his. Emea could tell he was only acting, but she still kept on with the attack and slid out from under him. When her legs were free, she didn't hesitate to boot her foot into the pit of his stomach. Thankfully, Emea knew her strongest feature were her legs, so the kick was actually rather hard. Aide lunged over and truthfully looked surprised by the force of the blow. Emea took her chance, and with a grin, she got to her feet and stood up. Ta-da! That, Aide coughed from his position on the ground, was excellent. That was amazing, Emea exclaimed and smiled brightly. Are you all right? Aide slowly stood up and brushed some dirt off his clothes. I'm fine. That was some kick. You said I could use strength. Indeed I did, Aide chuckled. Good job. You're a great student, Aide reciprocated. Okay, that was 2 lessons. Let's call it a day. Later at the campfire, Emea was sitting and picking the remains of her cooked rabbit off the bone. Hank and Dashiell had gone out to hunt some more food in the woods, and like always, Aide was nowhere to be seen. He always disappeared around nightfall. She looked into the fire, thinking about everything that had happened to her these past weeks. Since the moment she left Roches, she had been on an adventure. This was the first time she'd really gotten the time to sit down and think. What were her parents doing right now? Were they worried? Did they miss her? Obviously they did. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put out a bounty to get her back. She wondered what had happened to the wedding plans. Technically, she was still betrothed, but Emea figured the wedding had been called off when she didn't show up. She looked down at her food, which at this point looked more like mush. It was strange, she sort of missed her parents. She had grown up in Roches, always close to them. It was natural to feel a little homesick. But every time she thought about why she had left, there was not a doubt in her mind that this was where she was meant to be, right here, fighting for a free world where no one should feel left out. Rights for all. Men, she suddenly heard Hank's raw voice roar from the outline of the woods. Get over here now. Emea jumped up when Hank, Dashiell, and to her surprise Aide, all came out from the woods, looking like hell. Hank's clothes looked dirty and he had a cut on his cheek and arm. Dashiell looked no better. His eyebrow had a nasty slice and he was supporting his ribs with his hand. Even Aide looked like he had been in a fight, but at least he was unharmed. All the men quickly came running up to the trio and glared at them with shock written over their faces. Emea had to admit, she was pretty stunned herself. What happened? She voiced while Hank caught his breath. The king's guards, Dashiell darkly told. Everywhere, at least a dozen. They came out of nowhere. Those bastards were armed to the teeth, Hank growled. He looked less than pleased with being attacked after sunset. We were lucky to survive. What was Aide doing with you? Emea asked curiously. She looked up at him. I was in the area, he calmly replied. I saw them coming up behind a few trees. It was bloody wicked, Dashiell exclaimed with big eyes. He crawled up into a tree like a spider and started firing arrows at them. He never missed. Elves are good with bows and arrows. Tell me something new, Hank snapped irritatedly. He didn't seem to like the fact Aide had been their rescuer. Now listen, this evening has made me realize something. What? We can't stay in the woods no more, Hank told. The king's guards are out there searching for us. They know we frequent the woods more than we frequent the towns. He wants our heads, and he clearly doesn't let the nightfall stop him. I don't know about ye guys, but I have no wish to die while I sleep, Hank barked. I will die with a sword in my hand. All right enough, Hank, Emea impatiently cut in. What do we do then? We start heading for the towns, Hank said and gave them all a glare. We check in to separate inns in small groups so it won't seem suspicious. We arrange a meeting spot, and when we have to leave again, we meet outside the town. That way we avoid drawing too much attention. The towns, Emea exclaimed, but Won't they find us easier in there? They think we sleep in the forests, Hank replied. If we stay off trail for a few days, they'll lose track of us. Emea thought about it for a second. She supposed it was worth a shot, and she wouldn't mind sleeping in a proper bed for once. There was just one problem. What about Aide? What about me? Aide questioned and raised a brow. You can't stay in the woods all by yourself, Emea firmly said. We need you. What would have happened tonight if you hadn't seen those men coming? We would have survived just fine. Hank barked grumpily. No, you wouldn't, Emea growled. Look at yourselves. If Aide hadn't showed up, you probably would have been dead and this whole thing had fallen to pieces. You should be happy that Aide saw them. How did you see them? Dashiell voiced after having been quiet for a while. It was pitch black. We could barely see a hand in front of us. Aide took a moment to reply. Elves see in the dark. Hank barked loudly. That's just bloody great. Ye hear better, ye see better. I suppose ye smell better, too. Aide didn't reply. He just gave them a look that said it all. Oh, wonderful, Hank bickered. Elves can smell shite from a mile's distance. How surprising. Hank, Emea snapped, even though she herself was a bit stunned. She kept learning more and more about Aide, even if he seemed reluctant to share the info. This new piece of information nearly blew her away. We need to focus. Aide can't walk around in the towns. He could be seen. What are we going to do about that? I've been waking around in towns all over Senworth. Aide calmly spoke up. People have never noticed me. This is different, Emea said. You were laying low then. Now you're part of a group that's trying to stand tall. I'll be careful, Aide said. Don't worry about me. Great, it's settled then. Hank spoke before Emea could object. The elf boy will dress up like a human and the rest of us will split into groups. Are ye good with that? The men looked around at each other and then nodded. They never questioned Hank's ideas, and so far none of them had backfired. Despite his temper and hot-headedness, Hank was a clever man. Good, he shouted. Then let's get some rest. You, Hank turned Aide. Ye'll take the first night watch. Put those bloody elf senses to good use. Hank. It's fine, Aide said and held up a hand. I'll be more than happy to. Emea sighed tiredly. When would this feud between Hank and Aide stop? They should just put them out on a table and measure, Emea irritatedly thought. Great, Hank said and spat on the ground. To the western coast it is. It was embarrassing. Here she was, trying to prove to them all that she was just as strong as any man, and yet now, as she was lying balled up in her tent, she had to admit that she wasn't. They were one night away from the western coast, and then this happened. As many of the other things she had forgotten to take into account for when she left Roches, she had also forgotten about her monthly bleeds. In her rush, she had forgotten all about packing some herbal soothers for her cramps. That meant she was now left to suffer silently in her tent while the men were enjoying their dinner outside by the fire. It had been so embarrassing that morning when she had awoken. When she hadn't emerged from her tent for breakfast as always, Dashiell had poked his head inside to ask if she was okay. Like a fool, she had lied to him and told him she was just feeling under the weather. There was no way she was going to tell him she was immobile because of her gender's need to bleed every month. It was taboo, and besides, men didn't understand it anyway. At least it explained why she had been feeling so emotional lately. She always got extra sensitive up to her bleeds. Suddenly, she heard scampering outside her tent. Zimea. Of course it was Aide. His melodious voice had long ago been imprinted in her head. "What is it?" Emea muttered while painstakingly clutching her stomach. It hurt so much. "May I come in for a moment?" Oh no, he couldn't see her like this, not in this state. "I'm not feeling well," she said and made her voice raspy. "I don't want you to catch my illness." She coughed for good measure. Suddenly, the pelt to her tent was pulled aside and Aide looked in. "I know you're not sick, Emea." When he carefully climbed in, Emea moved over in the tiny tent. How come he just knew she was lying? He could always tell. "What do you want?" she asked once he had pulled the pelt down again. "Here, drink this." Emea now discovered he was holding something in his hand, a mug. She sat up and grimaced a little when another gut-wrenching shot of pain twisted in her stomach. "Why?" Aide looked down at the mug and smiled gingerly. "When the women back in my clan had their cramps, they drank this. It relieved them from their pains." That caught her offhand. How could he possibly know? "I know enough mothers and young girls to know the signs." Aide replied and offered her the cup again. "Please, drink it. I promise it will help." Emea frowned for a second, but then carefully looked into the cup. What is it? The consistency reminded her of spinach stew. It was thick and green with small flakes of grounded herbs. It looked disgusting. "It's an elf secret." Aide chuckled at the sight of her disgusted grimace. "And besides, I think it's better if you don't know." Emea gave the cup a sniff. Weirdly enough, it smelled like thyme. "Like him." "Okay," she finally said and took the mug. At this point, she didn't care if it was poisonous. Her cramps were so dreadful, she felt like dying anyway. She lifted the cup to her lips and drank. The content was warm, like tea. The thick sauce of a mixture slid down her throat, and to her complete and utter surprise, it tasted really good. "Oh my God," she exclaimed and took another sip. "It's delicious." "I'm glad," Aide chuckled again. "That means I did it right." "You've never made it before?" Emea asked, a little warily. "Only once or twice, but it's a long time ago." "Well, it's delicious," she repeated and emptied the cup. Her hungry stomach loved the feeling of the thick mixture landing in her belly. It churned, but accepted it. "It should start working over the next half hour or so," Aide informed. "You should relax until then." He made ready to leave the tent. Aide paused for a second and looked at her hand. He then gave her a little smile and opened the tent. Any time. When Emea woke up the next morning, she felt wonderful, well-rested and freed from pains. Whatever had been in that drink Aide had given her, it has worked. "Knock, knock, Em. We need to get going," she heard Dashiell say outside her tent. "Give me 2 minutes," she replied. She was happy that today they would finally arrive at the western coast. It would be nice to have a proper bath and a good meal. She braided her hair and rolled it up in a bun, only because she hoped it would help keep a low profile. She even changed into a dress, since a woman wearing breeches pulled attention. Everything had to work out today. If they managed to get into town and keep low, that meant huge progress for the rebellion. The Western people frequently suffered under a lot of wild storms since the cold sea bordered right up against them. It was a tough environment to live in, so the people of West did everything they could to survive. Lately, the king had been making it hard for them. Hopefully, the Western people would listen to their words and join their cause. The rebellion had been growing over the last few weeks, each new member a cherished asset. Some were scared when they first met Aide, while others were curious. No matter what, Aide was always polite and friendly towards them. Linnea packed up her stuff, slung her satchel over her shoulder, and then packed up her tent. When she carried it to the carriage, she found Dashiell securing some pelts in the back. "Hey," she smiled and made him look up. "Hi," Dashiell smiled back. "You seem to feel better." "A lot, courtesy of Aide. Are we all ready to go?" "Almost," Dashiell confirmed. "I can't wait to get there. I've never been this far west before." "Really?" Dashiell tied a knot tightly around a bag of grain before replying. "Back in Johan City, I never really got the opportunity to go anywhere. My parents were accidentally killed by the king's guards after the city got cleansed under the Great Purge," he told. Linnea stared surprised. "After that, it was just me. I grew up in the slums until I finally found work at a smithy. I never got around to go explore the kingdom." "Wow," Linnea breathed and put a sympathetic hand on his arm. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry for your loss." Dashiell smiled a little and looked down. "Thanks. I've gotten over it, but thanks." "Do you ever miss them?" He nodded quietly. "I do. I wish they could see what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do." "If they were alive, I'm sure they would be so proud of you." Linnea smiled and squeezed his arm. "To see their son grow up to fight for what's right." Dashiell let out a small laugh. "Well, that's assuming we succeed. Our luck is faltering." "We just need to push on," Linnea firmly said. "I'm positive the Western people will join us. I can feel it." "Are ye two lovebirds done chatting?" Hank's bickering voice sounded behind them. "We'd like to get a move on." Both Linnea and Dashiell blushed and looked away from each other. Linnea had never seen Dash as anything but a close friend. Hank's insinuation made it feel awkward. Dash was more like a brother, a close one. They got the wagon packed up, and soon they were on the road again. The western coast looked miserable. The buildings were old and looked like a stiff wind could knock them over. As their group reached the city gates, they worked out their plans. "We split up in 4 groups," Hank told. "We spread to the 4 corners of the town and check into separate inns. If we meet in the town square, close to sunset, we shouldn't be in danger. Are we all set?" The men nodded, and then the groups were divided into 4. Dashiell and Linnea went together in one group, while Hank insisted on keeping a close eye on Aide. Aide didn't object, simply rolled his eyes before tagging along. He had pulled his black hood up and kept his cloak covering his shoulders and hands. Emea followed Dashiell with a group of men to a small inn, close to the cold seas. She hadn't felt completely comfortable by splitting from Aide, but as Dashiell had pointed out, I was a smithy. I know how to work a sword if anybody attacks us. So they checked into a small inn named the Cracked Mill. It was obvious that the inn used to be a flour mill, but had been restored as an inn. Emea paid for the rooms with diamonds from her satchel, which the owner seemed more than grateful to receive as payment. "Enjoy your stay," he had said and handed them their keys. "It's so damaged," Dashiell spoke as they walked down the hall to their room. "I never would have imagined it to look this bad. It makes Johan City look like a nice holiday getaway." "It wasn't this bad the last time I was here," Emea mumbled as they started climbing up the stairs. She glanced out of a window. The city had much more life. Now it almost looks deserted. "We'll help them," Dashiell said and brought Emea's eyes back to him. "Don't worry. I think you're right. The Western people will join us. Anything is better than this." They each went to their separate rooms, and Emea had to admit she slept badly that night. The poverty here was worse than she had thought. She remembered her father's business journey here a few years back when he had brought her. The town was lively and painted in their signature colors, purple and iron gray. Now the streets were just bleak and looked to be wilting away, like a ruin where people lived. "We'll change that," Emea thought and rolled over on her bed, giving another shot at sleeping. The next morning, Emea had never felt so invested in their cause before. She dressed up in breeches and even let her hair hang completely plain and loose. To top it off, she secured her small dagger in her belt. As she walked out onto the empty streets and looked around, she just wanted to scream to break the silence. People were hiding inside their houses, afraid to get mugged if they stepped out. That was going to change. She started heading down the deserted streets and saw sad faces looking at her from the corners. Depressed faces. Emea finally reached the town square and found a few more people here than the empty streets. A few salesmen sold quilts and warm clothes to brace them against the bitter cold. They all looked like they had given up. Emea had had enough. On a bold idea, she stepped up on the ledge of the dried fountain in the center of the square and looked across the dead faces. "People of the West," she shouted in their native tongue. "Enough of this misery." A few heads turned to look at her, while others stopped what they were doing and stared. Emea took a deep breath. "You have been wronged. Your land has been neglected and robbed of its glory, and it's not okay. The king is responsible for your suffering," she shouted strongly. "He took your happy town and turned it into a sad, dying society. He killed you." Emea noticed a few more people started turning their heads, and they seemed to be actually listening. Of course, there were also those who scurried away in fear by the sound of her traitorous words. "He killed your families. He burned down your houses and took your gold. And for what?" She looked down at the people. "For nothing. You gained nothing from his actions, and that makes the king a liar." A few people gasped in shock because nobody spoke loudly against the king. Not unless they had a death wish. He promised your better goods. Emea continued unaffected. A bubble of everything she had ever wanted to say over the course of her entire life was finally bursting. Nobody could stop her. He promised you riches. He swore that your lives would be better, but take a look around. She gestured to the bleak square. What do you see? I see a town that's been stripped of its purpose. The western coast used to be a town of iron, she shouted. You forged iron stronger than diamonds and weapons so balanced. You put the king's royal weaponry to shame. People had now gathered in a mob around the fountain and were looking up at Emea. Some looked scared, others thoughtful, while a few silently nodded to the things she said. I haven't come here today to preach about what has happened and what has been done, Emea said to those who listened. I came here today to tell you what can happen and what could be done with your help. Now people listened interested. They wanted a change, it was obvious. Her words and bravery gave them hope. Some of you might have heard of us already, Emea continued, finally getting to the point. Some of you know that we've traveled around the kingdom to spread our dislike of the way King Ragnar rules his kingdom. We've come to the western coast today to spread those same words. Emea paused and glanced out to the people. Her stomach was exploding inside, but her hands were strong. Her voice was steady as she continued. We want our freedom back. We want to no longer live in fear of what would happen if we stepped out onto streets at night. We want children to have a safe home. We want women to have a voice in society. We want men to be able to say no to the demands the king puts on them. Emea took a long pause to glance at each and every face that was looking up at her. We want equality for all mankind. Children as grown-ups, men as women, humans as elves. She shouted the last part fiercely. No more judgment, no more hierarchy of society. Freedom and justice for all who wants a better future. Some people gasped when she had brought up elves. The word elf was practically taboo in public, but when someone dared to speak it, everybody listened. Whether it was from fear or interest was different from each person. I know you are scared, Emea then softly continued. You have good reason to be. King Ragnar is a powerful man, but he is only powerful when he is in control, she said and gave them all a strong stare. If you let him control you, he will win. If you let him scare you, you only feed his power, she continued. We, the rebellion, are tired of being scared, tired of being controlled. We've risen against his laws and foul ways to fight for a better world, a world where you don't have to be scared. The people were beginning to send glances to each other. It was as if they were talking privately to each other in their thoughts, considering her words and exchanging their opinions. Emea continued bravely. Join us. Help us rise up against Ragnar and create a better world. A king should listen to his people, but if he doesn't listen, we have to make ourselves heard. She held a short pause. I make no promises like Ragnar. I can't promise we will win. I can't promise that what we fight for will succeed. But we will give it our everything, Emea said, drawing the last word out to every syllable. Fight with us. What have you got to lose? We are all living in misery. Wouldn't you rather die fighting for a better world than live in a world where your children will grow up exactly like you have? She asked. Join us and fight for yourself. Fight for your town. Fight for your children. Fight for all mankind. The people of the town all glared up at her in complete silence. No one uttered a word, not even as much as coughed. Then, all as a unit, they started clapping. Their applause grew so loud that it nearly Amaya blew off her feet. She couldn't help but grin out to them. They had listened. They had heard her. They respected her. Amaya waved out to the crowd as she stepped off the fountain. People came rushing up to her, patted her on her shoulder, thanked her, blessed her. They all wanted to know where to sign up, and Amaya happily told them that if they wanted to join, they were already in. She told them to spread the word to their friends, to their friends' friends, to everyone they knew. She told them if they wanted to hear more, they should meet up in the square tonight, around sunset. With their help, they could defeat Ragnar and start a new world. That night, as Amaya met up with the others at the town square, she had never felt so powerful and so alive. Something inside her had exploded that morning. A need to fight, a need for something new. She could still feel the warm, bubbling spark inside her heart as she walked up into the square. But her happiness was immediately set on a pause when she found Hank and Aide in a heated discussion, right by the fountain. "Aunt care if ye think it's ye responsibility to save people at night. If ye run around in a mask and hood, ye sure as hell draw attention," Hank shouted into Aide's face. "Keep yelling all you want," Aide retorted. "I'm not going to stop saving those in need just because you're afraid I might get caught. I'm here. I'm wearing a hood. I'm denying my true identity," Aide snapped. "But I can't deny people help when someone is screaming for it." "Guys," Amaya said and broke the cold stare between them. They both turned and looked at her. What's going on? The elf was out prancing around the town last night. Hank snarled and glared back Aide. "He's endangering our mission by running around and saving people. What if the word gets around that a mystery savior is out and about saving the lot? It makes people think they're safe. They won't join us then." "Hank," Amaya snapped, "that's not true. The people are more than willing to join us. They already have." "What's that supposed to mean?" But just then, people started pouring in from the streets. Their dark shapes carried small candles to light their way. Some even brought lanterns. Once they saw Amaya standing there, their faces all lit up. "What's going on?" Hank asked, confused. He looked around and saw how more and more people started filling the square. "What's happening?" "Didn't you hear?" Dashiell's happy voice came from behind them. He stepped up with a wide grin on his face. "Amaya is their savior." "What?" both Hank and Amaya exclaimed in unison. She couldn't believe it. The turnout was more than the people she had addressed in the square earlier. It seemed the people really had listened and spread the word like she told them to. It looked like the entire town had shown up. Hank gaped around in astonishment, like he couldn't believe his eyes. "That's impossible." "Look," a woman exclaimed. "Look at that guy. He looks like the one that saved me last night. Here, old look, I told you he was real." "I recognize him, too," another man said. "He saved me from getting stabbed." "Take off your hood," Amaya whispered to Aide and looked up at him. He rose a brow at her. "Are you sure?" "Positive." Aide watched her for a moment before he turned to the crowd. He slowly lifted his hand to his hood and then pulled it down. The crowd gasped. Someone even screamed. But most of all, people just glared in shock. "He's an elf," the woman from before said. "A northern elf." "He saved us," the man from before also said. "An elf saved my life." "His name is Aide," Amaya said and stepped up on the fountain again. People looked up at her with big eyes. "He's been saving humans all over the kingdom. He saved me, too." "He saved them," she said and pointed to Hank and Dashiell. "And he'll keep on saving people because he's tired that nobody else is. We all are. The northern elves are alive, but you shouldn't fear them. They want a new world as much as we do." "I can't believe it," Hank whispered. He looked completely flabbergasted. "What is this new side of her?" Amaya smiled down at Hank, then flicked her eyes to Aide. His eyes were locked on her, proudness reeking from them. He mouthed something to her, and Amaya read his lips. Fire. She smiled strongly and turned to the crowd again. "Are you all ready for this? To fight for your right, freedom, and future? For justice?" The crowd cheered and raised their hands, lifting them in dedication. They were ready to fight. Amaya smiled out to them and then stepped down off the fountain while the crowd kept cheering. Hank seemed completely speechless with his mouth hanging half open. Dashiell was grinning brightly and cheering along with the crowd while Aide just watched her. A little smile tugged onto his lips. "I told you," he whispered. "You're more valuable than you realize. Fire is a strong element." Amaya swallowed and couldn't help but smile. A revolution had begun, and she had ignited it. All because someone told her she had a fire in her soul. There's an important message to learn in this chapter. Don't ever let someone tell you you can't do something. Whether it be race, religion, gender, age, illness, mental health, or disabilities, you can do it. Who you are and where you're from does not define your abilities to succeed. It empowers them. Remember, where there is will, there is way.